Clara Whitmore pressed her trembling hand flat against the carriage window and swallowed her tears before a single one could fall. She had been a wife for less than an hour, and already the man beside her had turned to stone. "Never speak to me unless I speak to you first," Nathaniel Carter said, cold as December frost. She had married a fortune. She had married a stranger who despised her. And she had no notion that the secret she carried would one day bring this proud man to his knees. If you love a story of dignity and redemption, subscribe and stay with me to the very end and tell me in the comments what town you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The chapel bell rang 11 times, and on the 11th, Clara Whitmore became the wife of the coldest man in Virginia. She stood beneath the wooden arch her own father had carved 20 years earlier, back when the Whitmore name still meant something in that dusty summer town. The dress she wore was ivory that had gone soft with age, mended at the hem, with stitches so fine you'd have to kneel to find them. She had sat up 2 nights repairing it herself by a single tallow candle because there was no money left for a new one. There was no money left for anything. Beside her stood Nathaniel Carter. He did not look at her, not once during the whole of the vows. He looked straight ahead at the preacher jaw, set like a man enduring a tooth being pulled, and when the old parson asked him to take this woman, Nathaniel said, "I will," in a voice so flat it made the front pews shift and murmur. The whole town had come to watch, not out of love, out of hunger. They came to see the richest landowner between the James River and the Blue Ridge marry the ruined daughter of a broken farmer, and they whispered behind their fans and their hymnals the entire time. Bought her plain and simple. Whitmore's girl, ain't got a penny to her name. Reckon he needed a wife the way a man needs a fence to keep folks off his business. Clara heard every word. She had spent her whole life learning to hear cruelty without letting it show on her face. So she kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and when the parson said, "You may kiss your bride," and Nathaniel Carter turned, looked at her for the first time, and did not kiss her, only gave a small stiff nod and turned back. The town gasped as one. Clara did not gasp. She had expected nothing, and she had received exactly that. "Well," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "I reckon that's the warmest welcome I'll get today." Nathaniel's eyes cut to her. For half a heartbeat something flickered there, surprise maybe that the mouse he'd purchased had teeth. Then it was gone, buried under that cold gray stillness he wore like a coat. "Come," he said. "The carriage is waiting." They rode in silence for the better part of a mile before he spoke, and when he did, his words came out measured and cruel, each one placed like a fence post driven into hard ground. "Mrs. Carter." He said the name as though it tasted of medicine. "I'll say this once, so we understand each other, and then I'll not say it again." Clara folded her hands in her lap and waited. "This marriage is an arrangement, nothing more. Your father owed debts he could not pay, and I settled them. In return, I required a respectable wife to quiet the tongues of this county and secure my family's standing. That is the whole of it. That is all it will ever be." "I understood the terms when I signed them," Clara said. "You needn't repeat them." He went on as if she hadn't spoken. "You'll have a fine room, good clothes, servants to see to your needs. You'll want for nothing, so long as you keep to your side of the house and your place in this county." He turned his face to the window. "Do not expect my affection. Do not expect my company. And do not—" His voice dropped hard and final. "Do not speak to me unless I speak to you first. I keep to myself. I have my reasons." Clara studied the side of his face. He was a handsome man. She'd give him that 35-years-old dark hair, going iron at the temples, a jaw a sculptor might have chiseled, and then thought better of it, was so severe. But there was a grief in him, worn so deep it had gone hard, the way a wound goes to scar and stops hurting only because it stops feeling anything at all. "May I ask you one question?" Clara said, "before I hush for good." His jaw tightened. "One. Why me?" She kept her voice even. "You could have bought any wife in this state. Widows with land. merchants' daughters with dowries, women who'd have thanked God on their knees for a Carter ring. Why buy the poorest girl in the county? For a long moment he said nothing. The wheels ground over the road. Somewhere a whip-poor will called through the July heat. Because, Nathaniel said at last, the poor ones are grateful, and the grateful ones don't ask for love. Clara turned and looked out her own window, then, and she did not let him see her face. Then it's a pity, Mr. Carter, she murmured, that you've married the one poor girl in Virginia who was never taught to be grateful for scraps. She heard him shift. She did not look to see whether he was angry. She had decided somewhere back at that wooden arch that she would not spend her life flinching. She had lost her home, her name, her father's good standing, and every comfort she'd ever known. She would not lose herself too. Nathaniel Carter did not answer her. But when the carriage rocked around the next bend and her shoulder swayed toward his, he did not pull away as quick as she expected. He noticed that, and he hated that he noticed. Carter Manor sat at the end of a 2-mile lane lined with oaks, a great pale house with more windows than a family could ever need, and fewer lights burning than a home should have. When the carriage stopped, a woman came down the steps, narrow gray 60, if she was a day, with a ring of keys at her waist, and a face that had learned long ago to give nothing away. Mrs. Abbott, Nathaniel said, stepping down. This is my wife. Show her to the East Rooms. See that she has what she needs. He did not offer Clara his hand. He walked past the housekeeper and into the house, and a moment later, a door somewhere deep in the place shut with a sound like a coffin lid. Clara stood at the bottom of the steps in her mended dress, holding a single carpet bag that contained the whole of her worldly possessions, and watched her husband disappear into his own home without a backward glance. Mrs. Abbott looked at her a long moment. Well, the old woman said, you'll be wanting supper, I expect. I'd want a great many things, Mrs. Abbott. Clara climbed the steps and met the housekeeper's flat gray eyes with her own. Supper's the smallest of them, but I'll take it, and I'll thank you kindly, and I'll try not to be a burden to a soul under this roof. Something shifted in Mrs. Abbott's face. Not warmth, not yet, but the wary respect one careful woman gives another. She said. This way, then. The East Rooms were fine. Clara would give the house that. A 4-poster bed with a coverlet of blue silk. A washstand with a porcelain basin painted with roses. A window seat that looked out over gardens no one had tended in years gone wild and half to seed. She set her carpet bag on the coverlet and did not unpack it. She sat on the edge of the bed instead, folded her hands, and let herself breathe. Really breathe, for the first time since morning. She would not cry. She had promised herself that. But her father's face came to her anyway, the way it had looked 3 days before the wedding, when he'd taken her hands in his and wept, and told her he was sorry. He was so sorry he'd failed her. He'd failed her dead mother. He'd failed everyone. And Clara had held him and told him no. Papa, no, you did not fail me. We lost the land, but we did not lose each other. And this marriage, this arrangement, it will set things right, and I am not afraid. She had lied to him. She was afraid. She was terribly afraid. But she was also underneath the fear something her husband had not counted on when he bought a grateful bride. She was furious, not at her father, who was a good man, broken by bad luck and worse men. She was furious at a world that let a farmer lose everything he'd built, while men like Nathaniel Carter sat in great pale houses and settled debts the way other men settled a bar tab, then warned their purchased brides to keep quiet and be glad of it. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Abbott with a tray. Supper, the housekeeper said. Master takes his in his study. He'll not join you. Not tonight, not any night, I'd wager. She set the tray on the little table by the window. Cold ham bread, a wedge of cheese, a glass of cider. You'll get used to the quiet. Will I? Clara rose. Mrs. Abbott, may I ask you something? And you may tell me it's not my place. The old woman waited. How long has this house been dying? Mrs. Abbott went very still. I beg your pardon. You heard me right. Clara moved to the window, looked out at the strangled gardens, the fields beyond going gray-gold in the last of the light. "I grew up on land, Mrs. Abbott. I know what a working place sounds like, the dogs, the men calling in the stock, the ring of a hammer at the forge. I've been here 2 hours, and I've heard none of it. I saw fields on the ride-in that ought to be waist-high in July, and they're barely to a man's knee. I saw fences down. I saw a barn roof half fallen, and nobody mending it." She turned. "This isn't a rich man's estate. This is a rich man's grave with a rich man walking around in it. So I'll ask again. How long?" For a long moment, Mrs. Abbott said nothing. Then she pulled the door quietly closed so no sound would carry down the hall and lowered her voice. 5 years, she said, since Miss Eleanor died. Clara sat back down slowly. "Who is Eleanor?" "Was." Mrs. Abbott's mouth thinned. "Miss Eleanor Vance. Masters intended before you. They were to be married in the spring of 1811. She was—" The old woman searched for the word. "She was sunlight, that girl. This house was alive then. 50 men on the land. Suppers with 40 at the table. Music. Master used to laugh. She said the word laugh the way you'd describe a country you'd once visited and could never return to. Then Miss Eleanor took sick. Fever, they said. Gone inside a fortnight. And him." She shook her head. "Something went out of him that spring, and it never came back on. He let the men go one by one, stopped the suppers, stopped the music, stopped near everything but riding out at dawn and coming home at dark and sitting alone in that study with a lamp and a bottle." She looked at Clara. "He's not a cruel man by nature, Mrs. Carter. He was a warm one once. Grief it froze him solid. And a man frozen 5 years forgets he was ever anything else." Clara looked at her supper and found she had no appetite for it. "There's more, though," she said quietly. "Isn't there? You said fever, they said. You didn't say fever." Mrs. Abbott's eyes flicked to the door. "That's all I'll say tonight," the old woman murmured. "Some things in this house you don't say out loud. Not even in a whisper. Not even to a wife." She moved to go, then paused at the door with her hand on the latch. "But I'll tell you this much, girl, seeing as you've got more spine than I gave you credit for. You keep those eyes of yours open. You already see more in 2 hours than most folks see in 2 years." She opened the door. "Just be careful what you see. In this county, seeing too much is how a person catches the same fever Miss Eleanor caught." And she was gone, and Clara sat alone in the fine blue room, her supper cold, her mind racing, and the whole shape of the house she'd married into, shifting into something far darker than a loveless bargain. Clara Whitmore did not sleep that first night. She lay in the four-poster and listened to the house, and the house told her everything Nathaniel Carter would not. She heard far off a single lamp-lit door open and close. She heard boots on wood pacing back and forth, the tread of a man who could not rest. Near dawn, she heard the front door, and from her window she watched her husband ride out alone into the gray, before the sun was even up the way a man rides when he cannot bear to be still. She did not go back to bed. She dressed plainly in the second of the 2 dresses she owned, and she went down to find the kitchen. She found more than that. She found a household of frightened people. There was a cook, Delia, a broad black woman with careful eyes who went silent the moment Clara stepped through the door and stayed silent waiting to see what manner of mistress this new one would be. There was a stable boy named Amos, maybe 14, thin as a rail, who whipped his hat off and stared at his own feet. There were 2 field hands taking their morning coffee at the back step, who set their cups down and rose and would not meet her eye. Every one of them stood as if braced for a blow. Clara looked at them all, and something in her chest went tight and hot. She knew that stance. She'd seen it on her own father's hands in the bad years before the ruined men grown small and careful and afraid because being seen by the wrong person at the wrong moment could cost them their bread. "Please," she said, and her voice came out gentler than she meant it to. "Sit down, all of you. Finish your coffee." Nobody moved. "Delia," Clara said, "is there coffee for me too? I've been up since 4, and I could drink a river of it." The cook blinked. "You want coffee, in the kitchen, with whoever's sittin' in it, yes." Clara pulled out a chair at the rough kitchen table and sat down in it in her plain dress like a farmer's daughter, which was exactly what she was. "I'll tell you all something, and then I'll not make a speech of it because I hate a speech. I wasn't born to a house like this. I was born on 100 acres of tobacco land 2 counties over, and I mucked stalls and shucked corn and buried my mother when I was 9 and helped my father run that farm till the day cruel men took it from us." She looked around at their startled faces. "So I don't know how a fine lady is meant to act, and I don't much care to learn. What I know is farm folk, and I know when farm folk are scared. So somebody's going to sit down and drink coffee with me and tell me plain what's got everyone in this house looking like the roof's about to fall on them." A long silence. Then Amos the stable boy said in a small voice, "Are you going to send us off, ma'am?" Clara's brow drew together. "Send you off? Why on earth would I do that? That's what the last one said she'd do." He twisted his hat. "The master's cousin, Miss Prudence. She come to stay a spell 2 winters back, and she said the place was overrun with idle hands, and half of us ought to be turned out to save the master's money, and after she left, 3 men were turned out and their families with them in January, and one of the babies—" The boy stopped. His throat worked. "One of the babies didn't make the winter." The kitchen went dead quiet. Clara set down her cup very carefully, because her hand had started to shake, and she did not want them to see it as anything but steadiness. "Listen to me," she said, and now her voice was low and even, and it filled the room the way quiet fills a room when it means something. "I will say this once, and you can hold me to it till the day I die. I am not Miss Prudence. I am not here to save any man his money by turning children out into the snow. Not while I've got breath. If a hand is turned out of this house, it will be over my objection and my grief, and I will fight it with everything the good Lord gave me. You hear, every one of you." She met each pair of eyes in turn. "You've got a place here. As long as I'm mistress of it, you've got a place." Nobody spoke. But something moved through that kitchen, slow, disbelieving, like the first thaw in a hard country. Delia, the cook, wiped her hands on her apron, turned to the stove, and poured a second cup of coffee. She set it down in front of Clara without a word. But she set it down gently. And that was a whole conversation. Nathaniel Carter came home at dark as he did every night, and found his house changed in ways he could not name. He noticed it before he understood it. He noticed that Amos took his horse at the stable, and for the first time in longer than he could recall, said, "Evenin', Master Carter," instead of just ducking his head. He noticed that the front hall was swept. He noticed a smell of good bread from the kitchen, and voices. Actual voices, more than one murmuring somewhere in the back of the house that had been silent as a tomb for 5 years. He found his supper laid in the study as always. But there was a jar of wild honeysuckle set beside the plate, cut and arranged by a hand that meant kindness. And Nathaniel Carter stared at those flowers for a long, uncomfortable while, before he shoved the jar to the far corner of the desk, where he wouldn't have to look at it. He did not go and thank his wife. He told himself there was nothing to thank her for. He told himself the flowers were a woman's foolishness, and the swept hall was Mrs. Abbott's doing, and the voices in the kitchen meant nothing at all. But he did not throw the honeysuckle out, and late that night, when he heard for he could not help but hear a light knock at his study door, he found himself against all sense saying, "Come." Clara stepped in. She had a ledger in her arms, a great heavy account book the estate's own that he had not opened in a year. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I know you told me not to speak unless spoken to, so I'll take my punishment for breaking the rule whatever it is. But I found something today I believe you'd want to see, and I'd rather be scolded for speaking than let it lie." Nathaniel set down his glass. His eyes went cold. "You've been in my accounts." "I've been in the estate's accounts, yes." She did not flinch. "Mrs. Abbott gave me the run of the house, and I took it. I was raised keeping my father's books from the time I was 11. I know a ledger better than I know my own name." She crossed to the desk, and set the great book down before him, open to a page she'd marked with a strip of ribbon. "And this one, Mr. Carter, is bleeding you white." "Take it out," he said flatly. "Now. You're being robbed." The words landed in the study like a dropped plate. Nathaniel went still. "What did you say?" "You heard me right." Clara set her finger on the page. "Look here. Your feed and grain purchases. You've been paying near double the county rate for 2 years running to a single supplier, a Mr. Harlan Voss out of Richmond. And here," she flipped a page, "your timber. Sold off whole stands of it at a third of what it's worth to the same handful of buyers. And here, another page, money going out. Regular, quarterly. Marked only obligations. No name, no note. Near $400 a year. Mr. Carter walking out of this house to no one I can find while your fences fall down and your fields die and you sit here alone in the dark, believing you're a rich man." She straightened. "You're not being ruined by grief, sir. You're being ruined by arithmetic. Somebody's been picking your pocket for years, and they've been doing it while you grieved because they knew a grieving man doesn't read his own accounts." Nathaniel Carter stared at the page. He stared at it for a very long time. Then, in a voice that had lost some of its stone, he said, "Who taught a farmer's girl to read a ledger like a Richmond banker?" "My father." Clara's chin came up. "The same farmer's father who lost his land to men doing this exact same thing to him. False debts, padded costs, money bleeding out to names that turned out to be no names at all." Her eyes held his, and for the first time there was fire in them plain to see. "I've read a ledger like this before, Mr. Carter. I read it the winter I was 21, and I read it too late. And by the time I understood what I was looking at, my father had already lost everything. So you'll forgive me if I didn't wait for permission to speak. I've watched what silence costs. I'll not watch it again." The study was very quiet. Nathaniel looked from the ledger to the woman standing before him, in her plain, twice-worn dress, and something in his chest, he had thought frozen solid for 5 years, gave a single painful crack. He did not know it yet. But that crack would spread. "Sit down," he said. It was not an order this time. It was almost a request. "Show me the rest." They sat over the ledger until the tallow burned low, and for 2 hours Nathaniel Carter listened to his wife the way a man listens to a doctor tell him how sick he truly is. She walked him through it column by column, and the more she showed him, the colder and quieter his face became, not with grief now, but with a slow gathering fury. "Who handles my correspondence?" he asked at last. "My purchasing, my contracts, all the papers I've not read in 5 years." Clara hesitated. She had learned the answer that afternoon from Mrs. Abbott in a whisper by the pantry, and she had dreaded the moment she'd have to say it aloud. "You know who," she said gently. "You've known who since before I got here. You just haven't let yourself say it." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "My uncle," he said. "Your Uncle William." Clara nodded. "He took over your affairs after Miss Eleanor died. Everyone in this county knows it. He's been the hand behind every contract, every sale, every payment out of this house for 5 years. And in 5 years, Mr. Carter, your estate has gone from the richest holding in the valley to a house full of unpaid, frightened people watching the fields die." She let that sit. "I'm not saying it to wound you. I'm saying it because somebody has to, and I appear to be the only person in your life you've forbidden from speaking, which I suppose is why it's fallen to me to be the one who does." Nathaniel opened his eyes. And for one unguarded moment, Clara saw the whole grief of him, the boy who'd lost his love, the man who'd handed his broken life to the nearest pair of hands he thought he could trust, and the dawning terrible suspicion that those hands had been picking his bones the entire time. "He came to me the week after we buried Eleanor," Nathaniel said very low, almost to himself. "He wept with me. He said, 'Nathaniel, you're in no state to manage anything. Let me carry the weight. Let me carry it for you brother's son. That's what family's for.' His hands closed slowly into fists on the desk, and I let him. God help me, I was so glad to hand it over. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to count. I just wanted to grieve and be left alone. He looked up at Clara. And you're telling me the whole time? I'm telling you what's in the book, Clara said quietly. The book doesn't lie, Mr. Carter. Men do. Books just add. It was near 2 in the morning when a sound came from the front of the house, the crunch of carriage wheels on the drive at an hour no honest visitor keeps. Nathaniel rose. Clara rose with him. Stay here, he said. I will not, Clara said, already moving toward the hall. You've had 5 years of staying alone in the dark, Mr. Carter, and look what it's bought you. Whoever comes calling at 2 in the morning, they can look me in the eye when they do it. Nathaniel caught her arm at the study door. It was the first time he had touched her, the first time since the parson had joined their hands, and they both felt it, and they both pretended they didn't. You don't understand what you're stepping into, he said low. Then it's a fine thing, she answered, that I'm the sort of fool who steps in anyway. The front door opened before they reached it, and a man came in out of the summer dark without knocking the way a man enters a house he already believes he owns. He was near 60, silver-haired, dressed in good broadcloth, with a wide, easy smile, and the warmest eyes Clara had ever mistrusted on sight. Nathaniel, the man said, spreading his arms. Nephew, I saw the lamp burning and I thought, well, the boy can't sleep again, poor soul. I'll sit up with him a spell. His warm gaze slid to Clara, and the smile widened. And this, why, this must be the new Mrs. Carter. My dear girl, what a joy! What an absolute joy to meet you at last! He crossed the hall and took her hand in both of his, and pressed it, and his skin was cool and dry, and his grip lingered a half-second too long. William Carter, he said. Your husband's devoted uncle. Anything you need, my dear, anything at all, you come to old William. I've been looking after this family's affairs for 5 long years. I know where every penny lives. He beamed. Consider me your servant. Clara looked into the warm, kind, lying eyes of the man who had destroyed her father, murdered a house's happiness, and picked her husband's fortune to the bone, though she could not yet prove a word of it, and she smiled back at him just as warmly. How very kind, Mr. Carter, she said sweetly. I can see already, you're a man who knows exactly where everything is. Behind her, unseen by his uncle, Nathaniel went very still, because he had known his wife 1 single day, and already he could hear in the honey of her voice the blade she'd hidden underneath it. And God help him, cold, ruined, grieving man that he was. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something dangerously close to hope. He crushed it. He was good at crushing things by now, but it did not die all the way. And in a house that had been dying for 5 years, the smallest living thing is the one that changes everything. It's late, Uncle, Nathaniel said, and his voice when he spoke had an edge to it that had not been there in years. My wife and I have had a long day. Whatever brought you at this hour, it can wait for morning. William's smile did not falter, but his eyes moved quick from Nathaniel's face to the study door standing open behind him, to the great ledger lying open on the desk in the lamplight, its pages turned back for the first time in a year. Of course, the old man said smoothly. Rest both of you. We'll talk in the morning. He bowed to Clara, warm as ever. Welcome home, my dear. And he let himself out into the dark. But Clara had been watching his eyes, and she had seen exactly where they'd landed. And she knew with the same cold certainty she'd felt the winter she was 21, and understood too late that William Carter had seen the open book, and that a man who has picked a fortune clean for 5 years does not sleep easy the night he learns someone has finally started to count. She turned to her husband in the dim hall. He saw the ledger, she said. I know. He'll move now. Fast. Men like him always do once they know the counting started. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. My father's ruin took 8 months from the day the false debts appeared to the day they took the land. But Papa never knew to look. You know now. That changes the arithmetic in our favor, but only if we're quicker than he is. Nathaniel looked at her. This stranger, this bargain, this farmer's daughter he had bought to keep the county quiet and warned never to speak standing in his ruined house at 2 in the morning, already fighting a war he hadn't even known he was losing. "Why?" he said. The word came out rough. "You owe me nothing, Mrs. Carter. I bought you like a bolt of cloth. I told you to your face I'd never love you. I forbade you to so much as speak. And here you stand in the dead of night taking my part against my own blood." He shook his head slowly. "You've every reason on earth to let me drown in this. Why fight for me?" And Clara Whitmore, who had lost everything and married a cold man to save what remained, looked at him for a long, quiet moment. When she answered, her voice was not sweet, and it was not sharp. It was only true. "I'm not fighting for you, Mr. Carter," she said. "I don't know you well enough yet to fight for you, and from what I've seen, you've given me precious little reason to start." She lifted her chin. "I'm fighting for that stable boy who thinks I'll turn him out in the snow. I'm fighting for the baby that didn't make the winter 2 years back because a woman with a cold heart called good men idle hands. I'm fighting for Delia and Amos and Mrs. Abbott and every frightened soul under this roof who deserves better than a master too broken to look at his own accounts." Her eyes held his steady and unafraid. "And maybe somewhere down at the bottom of it, I'm fighting for a farmer 2 counties over who lost everything he built to a man exactly like your uncle and never once got the chance to fight back." Her voice caught just once, then steadied. "So no, I'm not doing this for you. But you happen to be standing in the way of all of it. So I reckon for now we're on the same side of the fight whether you like it or not." She turned and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom, she stopped, and without looking back, she said one thing more. "You told me never to speak to you unless you spoke first." She rested her hand on the banister. "But you're going to need somebody in this house who isn't afraid to tell you the truth, Mr. Carter. And I appear to be the only one left who isn't." A pause. "So I'll break your rule as often as I have to. You can throw me out for it if you like, but I don't imagine you will, because deep down you already know I'm the first person in 5 years who's told you anything at all worth hearing." And she went up the stairs and left him standing alone in the hall he'd bought and could no longer feel safe in, with a dead woman's memory at his back and a living woman's words ringing in his ears. Words that had cracked in a single day the ice he'd spent 5 years building around his own heart. Nathaniel Carter stood there a long while. Then he went back into his study, sat down at the desk, and pulled the great ledger toward him. He turned the lamp up bright. And for the first time since they'd lowered Eleanor Vance into the ground, the coldest man in Virginia began slowly and grimly to read. The honeysuckle in its jar sat in the corner where he'd shoved it. He looked at it once. Then he reached over, drew it back to the center of the desk where the light could reach it, and left it there. And so it began. Not with love, for love was still a long, hard road away, but with a single open book, a single jar of wildflowers, and a farmer's daughter upstairs who had married a fortune, buried her fear, and decided, come what may, that she would not spend her one life being grateful for scraps. The morning after William Carter let himself out into the dark, Clara Whitmore came down the stairs before the sun and found her husband still at his desk, unshaven, the ledger open, the lamp burned dry, and 100 loose papers spread across the floor like a snowfall. "You didn't sleep," she said. Nathaniel didn't look up. "Neither did you by the look of you. I don't sleep the night before a war, never have." She stepped over the papers and set a cup of Delia's coffee down at his elbow. "Drink that. You'll need your wits, and a man with no sleep and no coffee has neither." He looked at the cup, then at her. "You made me coffee. Delia made it. I carried it. Don't make more of it than it is." But she said it gently, and she pulled a chair to the other side of the desk and sat. And for a moment the two of them just looked at the wreckage of 5 years spread out on the floor between them. "I've been reading since you went up," Nathaniel said. His voice was hoarse. "I read till the lamp died and then I lit another. And Clara..." He stopped. It was the first time he'd used her Christian name, and they both marked it, and neither said a word about it. "It's worse than you showed me. Far worse. It isn't just the feed and the timber and the 400 a year going out to no name. Look here." He turned a paper toward her. Clara leaned in. Land, she said slowly. Land. His finger moved down a column. 3 parcels. The bottom land along the creek, the North Woodlot, and the old Hensley tract I bought the year before Eleanor died. All 3 sold in the last 2 years. Sold Clara. My land. Deeded away over my own signature. He sat back. And I have no memory of signing a single one of them. Clara went very still. You're certain? I'd remember selling the creek bottom. That's the best water on the whole holding. My grandfather cleared it. I'd sooner cut off my own hand than sell it. He pushed the paper away as if it burned him. But there's my name at the bottom plain as day. My name and a witness and a seal. Who witnessed it? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. My uncle. And who bought it? That's the part that turns my stomach. He drew out another sheet. A company. The Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern. Richmond address. I never heard of it in my life. He looked up at her. But you have that look on your face. You've heard of it. Clara had gone pale. No, she said quietly. But I've heard it's like. When they took my father's land, Mr. Carter the buyer wasn't a man. It was a company. A concern with a fine long name and a Richmond address. And not one soul you could find to shake a hand or answer a question. That's how they do it. A man you can face. A man you can call a liar to his teeth. But a company, she shook her head. A company is just a name on a paper, and you can't sue a name, and you can't shame a name. And by the time you learn, there's nothing behind it but the very man who robbed you. The land's changed hands 3 times over, and it's gone for good. She looked at him. We need to find out who owns that concern, because I'd stake my life the answer's a man we've already met. Nathaniel was quiet a moment, then low. How would a woman even begin to find such a thing? And Clara Whitmore smiled not sweetly this time, but with the hard, bright edge of someone who has been beaten once and swore never to be beaten the same way twice. The same way my father should have, she said, by asking questions of the one man in this whole business who was too small to be worth buying off. There's always one Mr. Carter, a clerk, a witness, a boy who carried the papers. Somebody handled these deeds who wasn't paid enough to lie well. We find him, and we make him talk. Before Nathaniel could answer, boots sounded in the hall quick and heavy, and Mrs. Abbott appeared in the doorway with her face gone white. Master Carter, the old woman said, your uncle's back. He's coming up the drive right now, and he's not alone. He's got the sheriff with him. Nathaniel was on his feet before she finished speaking. Clara moved faster. She swept every loose paper on the floor into her arms in one motion, stacked them, and had the great ledger closed and under her elbow before the front door so much as rattled. He can't see we've been reading, she said low and fast. You understand me. If he knows how much you know, he'll move quicker than we can. Let him think you're still the grieving man who doesn't count. Let him think I'm nothing but a farm girl playing at housekeeping. Play stupid, Mr. Carter. Play ruined. It's the only card we've got, and we've got exactly one chance to fool him with it. Nathaniel looked at his wife of one day standing there with his whole ruined estate clutched to her chest, telling him how to save it, and something in him bent toward her like iron toward a lodestone. I've never been able to play a part in my life, he admitted. Then let me do the talking. She thrust the ledger at Mrs. Abbott. Hide this, now. And Delia's kitchen not upstairs. They'll search the study before they search a cook's pantry. The old woman took it and vanished. Clara turned back to Nathaniel, and before she could think better of it, reached up and smoothed the collar of his shirt, the way a wife does, because a wife would. You look like a man who's been up all night worried sick over money. Good. Look exactly like that. It happens to be true. The door opened. William Carter came in first, warm and smiling as ever, and behind him a heavy-set man with a tin star on his coat and a face like a closed fist. Nathaniel. William spread his arms. I'm so glad you're up. I've brought Sheriff Doyle out on a small matter of business. Nothing to trouble yourself over, nothing at all, but you know how these legal things want a signature. And I thought, why send a rider? I'll come myself and see the boy while I'm at it. His warm eyes found Clara and softened. "And good morning to you, my dear, up with the sun. A proper wife already, I see." "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Clara dipped her head all sweetness. "You'll forgive the state of us. My husband was up half the night. He does worry so." She let a little helpless sigh into it. "Money troubles. I try to tell him it'll come right, but you know how a man frets." She watched William's face as she said it, and she saw exactly what she'd hoped to see, a flicker of pure, satisfied ease. Good. She's a fool. He's still fretting and blind. Nothing's changed. "Money troubles," William repeated, all sympathy. "Yes. Yes, of course. Which is precisely why I've come." He drew a paper from his coat and laid it on the hall table, smooth as a card sharp, dealing a hand. "Nathaniel, my boy, I've found a buyer for the west pasture. Fine price. Better than fine. It'll settle the quarter's obligations and leave a little besides. All it wants is your name." He held out a pen. "Right here at the bottom. You needn't even read it. I've read it a dozen times. It's all in order. I'd never bring you anything that wasn't." And there it was. The whole trick laid bare in front of Clara's eyes in broad daylight. You needn't even read it. 5 years of those 4 words. 5 years of a grieving man signing his own bones away because the warmest voice in his life told him he needn't look. Nathaniel's hand rose toward the pen. Clara's heart stopped. If he signed, they lost the pasture. If he refused, William would know he'd started reading, and the whole game was up. There was no good answer. There was only, "Oh, Mr. Carter, wait." Clara stepped forward, wringing her hands, the very picture of a fretful new wife. "I'm so sorry to be a bother, but the west pasture isn't that the one with the family graves. Miss Eleanor's people, I was told. Only the ladies at the church said such a thing yesterday, and I confess I've been fretting over it whether it's proper to sell ground with graves in it, and I'd never forgive myself if I let it go, and then found we'd sold Miss Eleanor's own kin out from under her stone." She turned wide, worried eyes on William. "Is that the pasture, Mr. Carter, you'd know? You know where everything lives, you said so yourself." It was a lie. Clara had no idea whether there were graves in the west pasture. She'd invented it whole that instant out of nothing but a name and a hunch. But she watched William's face, and she saw the calculation flash behind his warm eyes. Is there? Could there be the church ladies? The talk a scandal. Eleanor's name dragged up, and she saw him decide in half a second that he could not afford to be caught selling a girl's grave. "You know," William said smoothly, tucking the paper back into his coat. "The dear child may have a point. Best not to rush a thing like that. Wouldn't do to give the gossips fresh meat. We'll leave the pasture for now, Nathaniel. I'll find another parcel. No trouble at all." He patted the table. "See how a good wife looks after a man. You chose better than you knew, nephew." "I begin to think I did," Nathaniel said quietly, and he was not acting when he said it. Sheriff Doyle, who had come all this way for a signature and gotten none, shifted his weight and cleared his throat. "So there's no business today then, William? You dragged me clear out here for nothing." "Not nothing." "Sheriff, not nothing. A pleasant morning call on my only nephew is never nothing." But there was the smallest edge in William's voice, now the first hairline crack in all that honey, and Clara filed it away. He didn't like being told no. He didn't like leaving with the paper still in his pocket. A man used to getting his signature every time he asked for it had just been turned away by a farm girl's chatter, and it had cost him something, and he knew it. He recovered fast. He always would. "Well?" He clapped his hands together. "I'll leave you good people to your morning. Nathaniel, rest. You look worn to the bone. Let old William carry the weight, that's what I'm here for." He moved to the door, then paused, and his warm eyes swept the hall one slow time and landed on the study door standing open, and the desk beyond, and the lamp burned down to nothing, and the chair pulled close to the desk on the far side, a second chair where no second person had sat in 5 years. His smile did not change, but his eyes lingered a half-second too long on that second chair. "Reading, were you, Nathaniel?" he said lightly. "Burned a whole lamp. That's not like you." The silence stretched one beat too far. Couldn't sleep, Nathaniel said. So I sat with the book, Eleanor's Bible. He didn't blink. First time in 5 years I could bear to open it. It was the finest lie Clara had ever heard a bad liar tell, and it landed because it was armored in real grief, and William, who traded in that grief, who'd built his whole fortune on it, could not for once tell where the true feeling ended and the lie began. "That's good, son," William said softly. "That's good. Eleanor would be glad." And he went out. The moment the carriage wheels crunched away down the drive, Nathaniel let out a breath like a man who'd been held under water. "Graves," he said, "in the west pasture." "There are no graves in the west pasture." "I know there are no graves in the west pasture. I own the west pasture." He stared at her. "You made it up. Whole. On the spot. To his face. I gave him a reason to want to say no that had nothing to do with you." Clara set her hands on her hips, and she was shaking a little now that it was over, but her voice held. "That's the trick of it, Mr. Carter. You never fight a man like that head on. You never say, 'I won't sign.' You hand him a reason he'd rather not, and let him think it's his own idea to walk away. A cornered man is dangerous. A man who thinks he chose to leave the corner is just relieved." She let out a long breath. "My father never learned that. He met them straight on every time with the truth in his fist, and they broke him over it. I swore if my day ever came, I'd fight them the way they fight sideways and smiling." Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. "Your father," he said. "You keep speaking of him. Is he alive?" Clara's throat worked. "Alive but not living, if you take my meaning. He's in a rented room in Lynchburg, with my aunt looking after him. The ruin took something out of him it never gave back. Same as the grief took something out of you." She met his eyes. "That's the thing I couldn't say to you last night, Mr. Carter. You and my father are the same wound. You just got yours from a woman dying, and he got his from thieves. But it's the same hollowing out. I've been watching it eat a man I love for 2 years. So when I saw it on you..." She stopped. "That's the real reason I couldn't leave your accounts alone. I couldn't save my papa. But I'll be damned if I'll stand by and watch it happen to a second man in the same room I'm standing in." The hall was very quiet. "Clara." Nathaniel took a step toward her. "I owe you an apology I don't know how to make. Everything I said to you in that carriage. Later." She held up a hand, and her voice steadied into something brisk because she could not afford to feel too much just now, and neither could he. "Apologize to me later, Mr. Carter, when we've won. Right now we've got a company to find behind a Richmond address and a clerk somewhere who witnessed a deed he shouldn't have and a very warm-eyed thief who just noticed a second chair in your study." She turned for the kitchen. "He knows something's changed. He doesn't know how much. That buys us a little time, but not much. So drink your coffee and let's go to work." They rode to Richmond 3 days later in the estate's one good carriage, and Clara Whitmore learned in those 3 days more about her husband than she'd learned in the wedding that made her his wife. She learned he'd nearly been a surveyor before he was a landowner, that he'd wanted to map the far country west of the mountains before his father died and left him a fortune he never asked for. She learned he read Greek. She learned his mother had died when he was 10. "Same as you," he said quietly, when she told him about her own, and that his father had gone hard afterward, and that Nathaniel had spent his whole boyhood trying to thaw a cold man, which was she thought but did not say, likely why he'd let himself go cold in exactly the same way when his own grief came. And she learned, watching him hand her down from the carriage in the Richmond street, that Nathaniel Carter had begun, without quite knowing it, and much against his own will, to look at her as if she were a person, and not a bargain, and not a burden, but a person the way a man looks at someone whose thoughts he has come to want to hear. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself the same thing he'd told himself about the honeysuckle, and she was exactly as convincing as he'd been. The Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern kept an office over a chandler's shop on a narrow street near the river. Clara had guessed they would find one of 2 things behind the door, either a fine room full of clerks and lies, or nothing at all. They found nothing at all. A single dusty room, a single desk, and a single frightened young man of perhaps 20 who leapt to his feet when they entered and knocked over his own inkwell doing it. Can I help you?" the young man stammered. Clara looked at him. Ink on his fingers. A patched coat. A face that had never learned to lie because it had never been paid enough to. There he is, she thought. There's the small one. The one too cheap to buy off. "You can," she said gently, taking the seat across from him before he could think to stop her. "What's your name, son?" "Ezra. Ezra Pauling, ma'am. I'm the clerk. The only one, mostly." He looked from Clara to the tall, grim man behind her and swallowed. "Are you buyers?" "Only Mr. Voss handles the buying, and he's not in today. He's most days not in." "Voss." Nathaniel's voice cut across the room. "Harlan Voss." Yes, sir. Mr. Voss. He owns the concern. Leastways he signs for it." Ezra's eyes darted between them. "Is something wrong? Have I done something wrong? I only keep the books I don't. Whatever it is, I only wrote down what I was told to." "Ezra!" Clara leaned forward, and her voice was the voice she'd use on a spooked horse or a frightened child, low and warm and certain. "Look at me, son. Nobody here thinks you've done anything wrong. I can see plain you're an honest boy in a dishonest office, and that's not your fault, and I'm not here to make it your fault." "Usulmuya." She let that settle into him, watched his shoulders drop an inch. "But I need you to help me. A wicked thing was done to a family, my family, Ezra. My own father. Land taken that shouldn't have been. And I think without knowing it, without meaning a lick of harm, you wrote some of it down. And I think you've got a good enough heart that it's sat wrong with you ever since. Hasn't it?" The young man's lip trembled. And Clara knew with a rush of certainty that she'd read him true, that this boy had been sitting in this dusty room for years, writing down deeds he half suspected were crooked, telling himself it wasn't his business, and hating himself a little more each day for the telling. "I don't—" Ezra started and stopped. His eyes filled. "I'm not supposed to say anything. Mr. Voss said if anybody ever came asking, I was to say I didn't know a thing, and he'd see me right, and if I talked he'd—" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "He'd see me wrong is what he said. He's not a kind man, ma'am. He looks ordinary, but he's not kind." "No," Clara agreed softly. "His sort never is." She reached across the desk and very gently laid her hand over the boy's ink-stained one. "Ezra, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to ask you one question, and after that you'll never see me again if you don't want to. My father was a farmer, a good man. He raised his crops and paid his hands and never cheated a soul in 50 years. And men like your Mr. Voss took everything he had, and they broke his heart doing it. And he sits in a rented room now, an old man before his time staring at a wall. That's what these deeds you write down do, son. That's the far end of the paper. There's a broken old man at the end of every one of them." Her hand tightened on his. "So here's my question. And you answer it or not, as your conscience tells you. Who really owns the Piedmont Land and Improvement Concern? Not who signs. Who owns it? Whose money? Whose pocket does the profit finally land in?" The room was so quiet, Clara could hear the chandler's boy whistling in the shop below. Ezra Pauling looked at her hand on his. Then he looked up, and there were tears standing in his eyes, and something in his young face gave way all at once, 5 years of swallowed conscience breaking loose. "Voss don't own it," he whispered. "Voss is just a name for the papers, same as I'm a name for the papers. There's a book, a real book, not the one for showing Voss keeps it locked, but I've seen inside it. I've had to true up the figures." He wiped his eyes with his ink-stained sleeve. "Every dollar the concern takes in, ma'am, every parcel it buys cheap and sells dear, it all goes one place. It all goes to a man out in the country, a gentleman. Owns a big estate. Voss calls him the principal. Won't ever say his name out loud, but I've seen it written. I've seen it 100 times." The boy's throat worked. "Carter. That's the name in the true book. William Carter." Clara did not move. Beside her, she felt Nathaniel go rigid as a fence post. "You're certain," she said quietly. "I've written it 100 times, ma'am. I could write it in my sleep." Ezra looked between them, and his frightened eyes went slowly wide as he took in the tall man's face, the graven jaw gone white, the fists closing at his sides. Why do you two look like that? Who are you?" "My name," Nathaniel said, and his voice came out low and terrible, "is Carter. Nathaniel Carter. William Carter is my father's brother. And for 5 years he has been selling my land to his own company and telling me I was ruined by grief." He looked at the boy as if from a great distance. "You've just told me my uncle robbed me the way he robbed her father. The same way. The same company. The same man." And Ezra Pauling, 20 years old and ink-stained and honest, said the thing that turned the whole matter from a robbery into something far worse. Then you're the one, sir." The boy had gone gray. "You're the one from the other book." Clara felt the floor tilt. "What other book, Ezra? There's a page, in the true book, older than all the land deeds." The boy was shaking now, the words tumbling out of him, past the point of stopping. "It's from before my time. I only found it once tucked in the back, and Voss caught me looking and near took my head off. But I saw it. Just a minute, but I saw it." He looked at Nathaniel with a kind of horror. "It was an account, sir. Money paid out. A payment for a service rendered. Dated the spring of 1811. And the man it was paid to," Ezra swallowed, "was a physician, a Dr. Sewell. And what the money was paid for, sir, written right there in Voss's own hand." "Say it," Nathaniel said. His voice had no bottom to it. "For attendance upon Miss E. Vance," the boy whispered, "and for his discretion regarding the same." The dusty little room went silent as a grave. Clara heard her own heartbeat. She heard the whistling boy in the shop below, and she heard beside her the terrible sound of her husband ceasing to breathe. Discretion, she thought. You don't pay a doctor for his discretion over a fever. A fever is nothing to hide. "Eleanor," Nathaniel said. The name came out of him broken. "He paid the doctor. My uncle paid Eleanor's doctor. For his discretion." "Nathaniel." Clara was on her feet, her hand on his arm, gripping hard. "Nathaniel, look at me. Not here, not in front of the boy. You hear me? Whatever this is, we do not fall to pieces in a stranger's office. We take it home and we look at it in the cold light." But her own voice was shaking now, because she understood what he understood, what any fool could understand, that a man does not pay for a doctor's silence over a natural death, and that the fever that carried off Eleanor Vance 5 springs ago and hollowed out the man Clara had married might not have been a fever at all. Nathaniel Carter turned to her, and Clara had never in her life seen such a thing happen to a human face. 5 years of frozen grief cracked straight through in an instant, and under the ice was not sorrow. Under the ice was rage, a clean white killing rage, the rage of a man who has just learned that the loss which ruined his life was not fate at all, but a murder, and that he has spent 5 years handing his fortune to the murderer and calling him family. "He killed her," Nathaniel said, very quietly, which was worse than any shout. "He killed Eleanor. And then he sat with me while I wept, and he took my hand, and he said, 'Let me carry the Waite brothers' son.' And I let him." His eyes came up to Clara's, and they were burning. "I have spent 5 years grieving a woman my own blood put in the ground, and I thanked him for his kindness." "We don't know that yet," Clara said, though every bone in her body already believed it. "A payment isn't proof. Discretion could mean there could be another reason." "You don't believe that." "No," she admitted. "I don't, but I've been ruined once by acting on a thing I felt in my gut before I could prove it, Mr. Carter, and I'll not see you ruined the same way. A feeling won't hang him. A feeling won't even shame him. We need that book, the true book, Voss's book with the doctor's payment in it, and the land, and your uncle's name, all in one place in his own hand." She turned to the trembling clerk. "Ezra, where does Voss keep it? I can't." The boy backed against the wall. "I can't, ma'am, he'll kill me. You don't understand, he told me if I ever—" "Ezra!" Clara crossed to him, and she took his shaking hands in both of hers. and she held his frightened eyes with her own. "You listen to me, son. You've carried this alone for years, and it's been eating you alive. I can see it plain. You're not a bad man. You're a good man in a bad place, and every honest bone you've got has been screaming at you to do something, and you've been too scared, and I don't blame you one bit. But that's over now." Her voice dropped fierce and low. "That book put my father in a rented room. That book maybe put an innocent girl in her grave. And you are the only living soul outside of two thieves who knows where it lies. You didn't ask for that. But it's yours now. God's a strange one, Ezra. He hands the whole weight of a thing to the smallest person in the room, the one nobody thought to buy off. And he says, 'Now, son, what'll you do?'" She squeezed his hands. "So, what'll you do?" The clerk looked at her. He looked at the tall, grim, ruined man behind her. He looked down at his own ink-stained hands, shaking in hers. And Ezra Pauling, who had written down 100 lies because he was afraid, made the bravest choice of his small life. "The false book he keeps in the desk," he whispered, "for anybody who comes asking. But the true one," he swallowed, "he keeps it at his lodging, not here, number 9 on Carey Street. Locked in a strongbox under his own bed, and he wears the key on a chain round his neck night and day. I've seen it." The boy's voice dropped so low, Clara had to lean close. "But there's one night a week he takes it off, Thursdays. He goes to a house, a gambling house, on the docks, and he don't like to lose the key at cards, or have it lifted off him by some woman, so he leaves the strongbox and the key, both with the landlady, a Mrs. Cobb, and she keeps it in her parlor cabinet till he comes home, come Friday morning." Ezra's eyes were huge. "That's the only night, ma'am. Thursday. The key and the book, both together, both out of his keeping in an old woman's parlor." "But you didn't hear it from me. Please, whatever you do, you never heard my name." Clara straightened slowly. "Ezra Pauling," she said quietly. "As far as any living soul will ever know, we never met you, and we never came to this office. And your name will never once cross my lips, or my husband's, from this day to the grave. You have my word, and my husband's, and the word of a Carter is about to start meaning something honest again in this state." She looked at Nathaniel. "Isn't it Mr. Carter?" "It is," Nathaniel said. "Boy Ezra, when this is done, when it's over, you come to Carter Manor. There's honest work for an honest clerk, and I'll see you kept safe, and I'll see you kept well. You've my word on that, too." Ezra Pauling looked at the two of them, and for the first time since they'd walked through his door, some of the terror went out of his young face, replaced by something Clara recognized because she'd felt it herself 3 days back, standing in a frightened kitchen at dawn. It was the look of a person who has spent a long time, small and afraid, being told for the first time that they are seen, and that they matter, and that they are not alone. "Thursday," the boy said. "Go on a Thursday." They did not speak in the carriage for a long while on the road back. There was too much, and none of it could be said in a jouncing carriage with a hired driver up top. But somewhere past the ferry, in the long gold light of the summer evening, Nathaniel Carter finally spoke, and his voice had changed. The stone was gone out of it. What was left underneath was rawer and far more human. "I have to tell you something," he said, looking straight ahead. "And I need you to let me say the whole of it before you answer." Clara folded her hands. "Go on." "When I married you, I told you it was to quiet the county, to secure the family name. That was a lie. Not the whole of it, but a lie." His jaw worked. "The truth is that after 5 years I could no longer stand to be in that house alone with her ghost. I couldn't stand the silence. I couldn't stand the thinking. And I told myself if I brought a stranger into the house, someone I owed nothing and felt nothing for the noise of another person living there, would drown it out. That's what you were meant to be, Clara. Noise. A thing to fill a silence I couldn't bear." He drew a hard breath. "I bought you to be furniture. I told myself you'd be grateful and quiet, and I'd never have to know you, and the emptiness would just stop echoing. That's the man I was 11 days ago. I want you to know exactly how low a thing I did, because in a minute I'm going to say something else, and I don't want you thinking I've forgotten the low thing to say it. Chopo. Olmo. Clara said nothing. She had gone very still. And then you walked into my kitchen and told a room full of frightened people you'd fight for them with your dying breath. He turned and looked at her now full on. And you opened a book I'd been too much a coward to open for a year, and you found the thief in my house in a single night. And you stood in front of my uncle and lied like a river to save my land, while I'd have signed it away like a fool. And you took a terrified boy's hands in a dusty room, and you made him brave. His voice roughened. You were supposed to be furniture Clara Whitmore, and instead, you turned out to be the first living person to walk into that dead house in 5 years. I bought you to fill a silence, and you didn't fill it. You ended it. The carriage rolled on. Clara looked at her hands and found she could not quite see them. That's a fine speech, Mr. Carter, she said at last, and her voice was not as steady as she wanted. For a man who told me 11 days ago never to speak unless spoken to. I'm speaking to you now, he said quietly. I don't expect I'll ever stop again. Don't. Clara's head came up, and there was warning in it, and something else underneath the warning. Don't say sweet things to me, Nathaniel Carter. Not now. Not tonight, with what we just learned, with your dead Eleanor's name freshly in both our mouths, and her murder, if it was murder not an hour cold in the telling. You're a man who just found out his whole grief was a lie. Somebody sold him. You're not in your right mind, and it'd be the easiest thing in the world for you to reach for the nearest living warmth to keep from drowning, and I happen to be sitting the nearest. She held his eyes fierce and afraid. I've been furniture before. I'll not be a raft. The words hit him. She saw them hit him. That's fair, Nathaniel said, after a moment low. That's more than fair. He looked away out at the passing country. I'll take it back then. Not because it isn't true. It's the truest thing I've said in 5 years, but because you're right that tonight's no night to say it, and you deserve to hear it on a night you can trust it. He was quiet a moment. But I'll say it again, Clara. When this is over, when your feet are on solid ground and mine are too, and there's no thief left in my house and no ghost left unaccounted for. I'll say it again then plain, and you can believe it or not, but I'll say it. Clara turned her face to her own window so he would not see it. We'll see, Mr. Carter, she said softly. We'll see what's left of either of us when this is done. But she was smiling just a little in the dark of the carriage where he couldn't see, and her heart, which she had walled up as carefully as he'd walled up his, gave a single traitorous knock against the stone. They came home to Carter Manor in the full dark, and Mrs. Abbott met them on the steps with a lamp and a face full of trouble. Master Carter, thank God you're back. The old woman's voice shook. Your uncle was here, this afternoon while you were gone, and he didn't come calling social this time. She held the lamp higher, and her old eyes were frightened. He came with 2 men and a wagon. He said you'd given him leave to take the north herd to market on your behalf. Said it was arranged. And when I said I'd heard nothing of it, he said an old housekeeper's got no call to question the master's own uncle, and he took them. 40 head of cattle, sir. Drove them off not 3 hours past. Nathaniel's face went hard. That's a quarter of everything I've got left on 4 legs, he said quietly. There's more. Mrs. Abbott's hand trembled on the lamp. Before he left, he stood right there in the hall where you're standing, and he looked at me a long, cold while, and the warm went clean out of his face, sir. All of it. First time I ever saw the real man under it in 20 years. She swallowed. And he said, you tell my nephew when he's back from his little journey to Richmond. He knew, sir. He knew where you'd gone. You tell him old Williams carried this family a long time, and it'd be a sorrowful thing if the boy forgot who holds the weight. Sorrowful for everyone. You tell him that. The old woman looked between them. It was a threat, Master Carter. Warm as he ever talks, that was a threat plain as I've ever heard one. Basso I sees heartbreak. Clara and Nathaniel looked at each other in the lamplight. He knows we went to Richmond, Clara said quietly. He doesn't know what we found, but he knows we're looking, and he just took 40 head of cattle in broad daylight to show us he can, and to bleed you faster before you can move." She turned to Mrs. Abbott. "When did he leave exactly?" "Gone 3 hours near enough." "And today is Tuesday, Mrs. Carter." Clara felt it settle into her like a cold stone dropping into a well. She looked at Nathaniel. "2 days," she said. "Thursday's the only night the book and the key are out of Voss's keeping. Ezra said so. Thursday at Mrs. Cobb's on Carey Street, or we wait a whole week for the next one." Her voice dropped. "And your uncle just told us in his own warm and murdering way that he's done waiting. He's moving now. He'll bleed you dry and buy off anyone who's seen too much, and if he so much as suspects that clerk talked—" She stopped. She thought of Ezra Pauling's frightened, honest face. "We have 2 days, Nathaniel. 2 days to get that book out of Richmond before your uncle either destroys it or destroys the boy who told us where it lies. And Thursday is the only door we get." Nathaniel Carter stood on the steps of the dead house his uncle had killed to inherit with his stolen cattle, bawling somewhere on a Richmond road, and a murdered woman's name in his mouth, and a farmer's daughter beside him who had walked into his ruin 11 days ago and refused day after day to let him drown in it. The stone was gone out of him for good now. What stood in its place was harder than stone and warmer and far more dangerous to the man who'd made him. "Then we've got 2 days, he said. And he turned and looked at Clara, and for the first time since a preacher had joined their unwilling hands beneath a wooden arch, she saw the whole of the man Eleanor Vance must once have loved. Not the ruin, not the ice, but the warm and reckless and determined man underneath all 5 years of grief. "Get what sleep you can, Mrs. Carter. We ride for Richmond at first light." And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune and found a war, who had buried her fear and cracked a frozen heart and set her feet on a road. There was no walking back from, lifted her chin in the lamplight and answered him the only way she knew how. "I've never slept the night before a war in my life, Mr. Carter," she said. "But I reckon I'll ride just fine without it." They rode for Richmond at first light, and by the time the sun stood high, they were still a full day short of Thursday, which was exactly the problem Clara had lain awake turning over all the short hours of the night. "We're too early," she said as the horses ate up the road. 2 days, and only one of them any use to us. Voss keeps the book on him every night but Thursday. So what do we do with tomorrow, Nathaniel? Sit in a Richmond boarding house and pray your uncle doesn't find that boy first." "We don't sit," Nathaniel said. "We use it. Ezra said Voss keeps a false book at the office, the one for anybody who comes asking. If we're to take the true book Thursday night, I want to know exactly what the false one says first. I want to know the lie before I hold the truth, so I can prove the one against the other." Clara turned to look at him. "That's good thinking. I had a fine teacher these past 11 days, he said, and did not look at her when he said it, and Clara felt her face warm and was glad of the horses jouncing to blame it on. They came into Richmond by afternoon and took 2 rooms at a quiet house well away from the river under the name Whitmore, rather than Carter Clara's idea. "Your name's known here now," she said. "Voss knows it. Your uncle's men know it. But nobody in this city ever heard of a farmer named Whitmore. And that's the whole use of marrying a nobody, Mr. Carter. Sometimes a nobody's the safest thing a body can be." And Nathaniel had looked at her a moment and said low, "You're not a nobody. You never were. You were just the only one who hadn't been told yet." And Clara had busied herself with her gloves and not answered. They meant to watch the office the next morning to learn Voss's habits before they moved. But the whole careful plan came apart before it began, because when they walked past the chandler's shop on Carey Street, a little before noon, meaning only to mark the door, they found it standing open and a knot of people gathered on the walk and a constable in the street. Clara's blood went cold. "Nathaniel, something's happened." They pushed close enough to hear. A washerwoman was telling it to anyone who'd listen, her voice pitched high with the pleasure some folks take in bad news that isn't theirs. There'd been a robbery in the night, she said. The land office over the chandler's. Someone had broken in and turned it upside down, papers everywhere, the desk smashed clean apart. And the young clerk who worked there, the quiet one, the Pauling boy. Clara's hand found Nathaniel's sleeve and gripped it hard enough to hurt. The Pauling boy had been found this morning at the foot of the office stairs, with his neck broke, the washerwoman said. And wasn't it a shame, such a young thing? And the constable was calling it a fall, said the boy. Must have come in the night to stop the robber and tumbled down the dark stairs in the struggle. But she'd heard the boy was mortal, afraid of the dark, and never once set foot in that office after sundown, not once in 3 years. So what was he doing there at midnight? She'd like to know, and nobody could tell her. And wasn't it a shame? Clara could not breathe. "He's dead," she whispered. "Nathaniel, that boy is dead. Ezra. We sat with him yesterday. We took his hands. We promised him—" Her voice broke apart. "We promised him he'd be safe. We promised him honest work. We told him nobody would ever know his name, and he's dead, not 1 day after, with his neck broke at the bottom of a stair. He was too frightened to climb in the dark." Clara. Nathaniel's own voice was terrible. He took her by both arms and turned her away from the crowd, walked her fast and firm down the walk and around a corner where no one could see her face. "Clara, look at me. Not here. You cannot fall to pieces on this street. You told me that yourself 3 days back in that very office. Not here. He was a boy." She was shaking all over. He was 20 years old, and he'd been carrying that book's weight alone for years. And he was so afraid, and the one brave thing he ever did in his life was tell us where it lay, and it killed him. Your uncle killed him for it. Nathaniel, sure as if he'd pushed him down that stair with his own 2 hands, and he probably did. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep the sound in. "This is my doing. I made him brave. I sat there and I took his hands, and I told him God had handed him the weight of the thing, and I made him brave, and it got him killed." No. Nathaniel's grip tightened. "No. You listen to me now the way I've listened to you. My uncle killed that boy, not you. William Carter has killed before we both know it. Now we've known it since yesterday, and he'd have killed that boy the moment he suspected he'd talked, whether you'd been gentle with him or cruel. You didn't make Ezra brave, Clara. You gave him 1 day of being seen and thanked and told he mattered after years of nobody caring whether he lived or died. If that boy had to die at my uncle's hand, then thank God the last thing he did on this earth was a brave thing done for good people who kept faith with him. You didn't spend his life. My uncle spent it. Don't you dare take that man's sin onto your own back. You haven't the room for it. You're carrying too much already." Clara looked up at him, her eyes streaming, and she saw that his own were wet, and that steadied her more than any words could have, that this hard, cold man was weeping too for a clerk he'd known 1 single day. "He knew," Nathaniel said quietly. "That's the part that guts me. Voss or my uncle, they knew someone had come asking. The book. The office turned over. They weren't robbing the place, Clara. They were cleaning it. They came for the false book and any scrap that might point back at them, and they found the boy there, or brought him there, and they made sure the one witness who could name them would never speak again." His jaw worked. "Which means they know we're close. And it means—" He stopped. "It means the true book." Clara finished, her voice gone hollow and hard. "The one at Mrs. Cobb's, the one Voss leaves with the landlady on Thursdays." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "If they're cleaning house, Nathaniel, that book is the biggest thing left to clean. Voss won't leave it lying in an old woman's parlor cabinet now, not with someone sniffing after it. Tomorrow's Thursday. It may be the last Thursday that book ever exists. If we don't take it tomorrow night, your uncle burns it, and every crime the man ever committed, your land, my father's land. That poor boy's neck and whatever truly happened to Eleanor, it all goes up the chimney with it, and there's no proving a word of it ever again." They stood close together on the empty side street, and the whole shape of the thing had changed in the space of a single overheard washerwoman's tale. It was not a search anymore. It was a race against a fire. "Then we don't wait for a plan," Nathaniel said. "We take it tomorrow night, however it can be done." "We take it tomorrow night," Clara agreed. And then, quiet, fierce, to the memory of a frightened, honest boy she'd known one day and failed to keep safe. "And we hang that man with the very book he killed you to hide Ezra Pauling. I swear it on my father's name. You'll not have died for nothing, not while I've got breath." Mrs. Cobb's lodging house on Carey Street was a narrow brick thing, 3 stories tall, respectable enough by daylight, and Clara studied it from across the way for the better part of an hour that Thursday afternoon, while Nathaniel watched the street. They had spent the morning learning what they could. Harlan Voss did indeed go out on Thursday nights. A hired boy at the corner told them so for a penny. Said the gentleman on the second floor went to the docks every Thursday regular as church and came home sour and broke every Friday dawn. And the landlady, Mrs. Cobb, was a widow of near 70, who kept a tidy house, went hard of hearing, and took a glass of hot toddy every night at 9, and slept like the dead after. 9 o'clock, Clara said. Voss gone to his gambling, the old woman deep in her toddy, and the book and the key both in her parlor cabinet. She let out a slow breath. It's as clean a window as we'll ever get. And it's the last one. So the only question left is how we get into a locked house and a locked cabinet without waking a woman who may or may not sleep as deep as a corner boy claims. I could force the door, Nathaniel said, and leave it splintered for Voss to find Friday morning. He'd know inside a minute the book was taken and by whom. And he'd have your uncle warned before we made it back to the manor. No. Clara shook her head. This has to be quiet. It has to be a theft. Nobody knows was a theft until it's far too late to matter. Voss has to go on thinking that book is safe in that cabinet for as long as we can manage, so that when we finally spring it on your uncle, he's got no warning. No time to run, no time to spin a fresh lie. She was quiet a moment, thinking. There's only one clean way into a locked house, Mr. Carter. Somebody has to be invited in. Nathaniel frowned. Invited? By an old widow who's never laid eyes on us. By an old widow, Clara said slowly, an idea gathering behind her eyes, who is lonely and hard of hearing and takes in lodgers because she needs the money and the company both. A widow like that, Nathaniel, doesn't fear a knock at her door of an evening. She welcomes it. Especially. She looked down at her own worn dress, especially from a sweet young woman traveling alone who's just arrived in the city, and heard tell that Mrs. Cobb keeps the cleanest, most respectable rooms on Carey Street, and might there be one to let, and oh, what a lovely parlor might a body sit a spell, she's so weary from the road. Nathaniel looked at her. You mean to walk in the front door, he said, and have her invite you to sit in the very room where the book is? I mean to be the most harmless, tiresome, chattering young woman that poor deaf widow ever had the misfortune to meet, Clara said. I mean to wear her out with talk of my dear departed mother, and my long, sad journey, and my hopes for a room until 9 o'clock comes, and her toddy calls, and she's so glad to be shut of me, she near falls asleep in her chair, and while she nods, Mr. Carter... Clara's chin came up. I open that cabinet. Because a woman sitting in a parlor she was invited into isn't a thief. She's a guest, and nobody watches a guest. And if she doesn't nod off, if she stays wide awake and watches you the whole evening, then I take a room and I thank her kindly, and I come back the next Thursday if there is a next Thursday. Clara's voice hardened. But there won't be, so she has to nod off. And that's where you come in, Mr. Carter, because I can talk a lonely widow to sleep, but I can't be 2 places at once, and if Voss comes home early, if his luck turns and he quits the cards and starts back for Carey Street, somebody has to be watching that dock road to warn me before he reaches the door. That's your part. You watch the road. You give me the signal if he comes, and you pray to God I'm quick with a cabinet lock. Nathaniel was quiet a long moment. I don't like it, he said finally. You alone in a house with that book in it, and Voss maybe a quarter hour away. If he came home and found you, Clara, that man broke a boy's neck 2 nights ago and called it a fall. If he caught you, he won't catch me. She said it steadier than she felt. And it has to be me. You're too big to be harmless and too grim to chatter, and besides, your name's known in this city, and mine's not. It has to be the farmer's daughter nobody's ever heard of in the mended dress who couldn't possibly be a danger to a soul. She reached out, she hardly knew she did it, and laid her hand flat against his chest, over the heart she'd been cracking open a little more each day. I've been underestimated my whole life, Nathaniel Carter. By my betters, by the town, by you in that carriage 11 days ago. It's cost me plenty. But tonight, God willing, it's finally going to pay." He looked down at her hand on his chest, and he covered it with his own and held it there. "Come back to me," he said, low, rough. "Whatever else happens tonight, you come back through that door. Do you hear me, Clara? I've buried one woman He stopped. His jaw worked. "I'll not do it twice. Come back to me." Clara's heart turned over in her chest. "I hear you, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "I'll come back. I've a book to steal, and a boy to avenge, and a father to see justice for. I've too much left to do to go and get myself killed over a parlor cabinet." She stepped back and squeezed his hand once before she let it go. 9 o'clock. Watch the road. And Nathaniel, if you see Voss coming, don't you dare play the hero and try to stop him yourself. You signal, and you let me get out clean. A dead husband does me no good at all. A widow's a hard thing to argue with," he said, and it was nearly a smile, the ghost of one the first she'd ever seen try to reach his mouth. "Then don't make me one," Clara said, and turned and went to make herself harmless. At 7:30, she knocked on Mrs. Cobb's door with her carpetbag in her hand and her heart in her throat, and when the old woman opened it small and stooped and squinting an ear trumpet on a ribbon round her neck, Clara became in the space of a breath someone else entirely. "Oh, thank the Lord," she said breathless, pitching her voice loud and warm and weary all at once. "Are you Mrs. Cobb? Please say you're Mrs. Cobb. I've walked half of Richmond asking after you. They told me down at the coach house if a respectable young woman traveling alone wants a clean bed and Christian company, there's not a house in this city to match Mrs. Cobb's on Carey Street, and I've been that anxious to find it before dark. A girl alone in a strange city, you understand. Oh, it's frightening, I don't mind telling you. Slow down, child, slow down." But the old woman was already smiling, already stepping back to let her in, already warmed by the flattery and the company. "You'll do yourself an injury talking so fast. Come in out of the street. A room, is it? If you've one to spare. Oh, what a lovely hall. My mother would have wept to see a hall kept so fine she passed this spring, ma'am. God rest her. It's part of why I've come away. The house was so empty after—" Clara let her voice catch just so, and watched the old widow's face soften clean through with fellow feeling, one lonely woman recognizing another. "There now," Mrs. Cobb murmured, taking her arm. "There now, you poor thing. Come and sit in the parlor, and I'll fetch us some tea, and you'll tell me all about it. A girl who's lost her mother oughtn't be standing in a cold hall." And just like that, Clara Whitmore was inside the house and inside the parlor, and sitting not 6 feet from a walnut cabinet with a brass lock, and it had cost her nothing but a true story about a dead mother and a lonely one's kind heart. She hated herself a little sitting in that warm parlor, being kind to a good old woman she meant to rob. But she thought of Ezra Pauling with his neck broke at the bottom of a stair, and she thought of her father staring at a wall in a rented room, and she thought of a girl named Eleanor, 5 years in the ground with a doctor paid for his silence, and she set the hate aside. There would be time to be ashamed later. Tonight, there was only the book. She talked. Lord, how she talked. She told Mrs. Cobb about her mother and her village and her long, sad journey. And half of it was true, and half she spun out of air, and the old woman drank it all in, nodding, patting her hand, glad past telling to have a young voice filling her lonely parlor of an evening. And all the while, Clara's eyes went again and again to the little brass clock on the mantel and to the cabinet in the corner. And once, when Mrs. Cobb bent to pour the tea to the window, where somewhere out in the dark across the road, Nathaniel Carter was watching the dock road and waiting. At 9:15, the old woman yawned. "Oh, listen to me," Clara said at once, all contrition. "Keeping you up half the night with my chatter and you an early-to-bed woman, I'll wager I can always tell. You go on and have your evening. Mrs. Cobb, don't mind me. Would it be a terrible imposition if I sat here in your lovely warm parlor a few minutes more? Only my room at the coach house is so cold and cheerless, and it's so kind and safe feeling here, and I've been that lonely on the road." "Of course, child, of course." Mrs. Cobb was already rising, already reaching for the bottle on the sideboard, already thinking of her toddy and her bed. "You sit as long as you like. Bank the fire when you go. There's a good girl, and pull the door to. I'll not hear you deaf as a post. Once I'm abed, always have been. My Josiah used to say, a cannon wouldn't wake me." She poured her toddy with a hand that shook a little, drank half of it standing, and shuffled toward the stairs. "You come back tomorrow about that room, mind. I've a nice one on the 3rd floor, Southern Light. We'll settle it in the morning." "I'll be here first thing," Clara promised. "Bless you, Mrs. Cobb. You've been a kindness to a lonely girl. My mother would have loved you." The old woman smiled pleased and climbed the stairs, and a door closed above, and after a while the house went still, and Clara Whitmore was alone in the parlor, with the book 6 feet away, and her own heart going like a hammer. She made herself wait. She counted to 500 slow, listening to the ceiling for any creak of the old woman moving about. Nothing. Then a sound came, faint, rhythmic, from above, and Clara nearly laughed aloud with the relief of it. Snoring. Deep and even and true. Deaf as a post and dead to the world. She crossed to the cabinet. The lock was a simple thing, brass old. Clara had picked worse in her farming days, when a father who kept his own accounts sometimes lost his own keys, and she'd learned the trick of it from a horse trader who'd sworn her to secrecy. She drew a hairpin from her own hair, and a second, and she knelt at the cabinet and set to work with hands that had gone remarkably coldly steady now that the moment was finally on her. Left pin holding tension. Right pin feeling for the pins inside one by one. Patient, patient. The lock gave with a small click that sounded in that silent parlor, loud as a gunshot. Clara froze. Listened. The snoring above never faltered. She opened the cabinet, and there it was. Wedged between a stack of table linens and a japanned tea caddy, a strong box iron-bound, and beside it on a chain, a single heavy key. Voss's strong box and Voss's key, both left in the care of a deaf old widow, exactly as a dead boy had said they'd be. Clara's breath came short. She lifted out the box, heavier than she'd expected, and set it on the parlor floor, and fitted the key, and turned it, and raised the lid. Papers. A false-bottomed tray of ordinary papers, receipts, and letters, a decoy for any casual eye. Clara lifted the tray clean out and set it aside, and beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, was a book. She unwrapped it with shaking fingers. A ledger, plain-bound thick with years. She opened it to the middle, and held it to the fire's light, and there, in a cramped clerk's hand, page after page, was everything. The Piedmont land and improvement concern its true accounts. Parcels bought for a song and sold for a fortune. The Whitmore land, her father's land, listed by name and date and the pitiful sum they'd paid for it. Carter land. Nathaniel's land, the creek bottom and the woodlot and the Hensley tract deeded away over a forged signature. And every dollar of profit, page after page, flowing to one place, one name written 100 times in that cramped and careful hand, to the account of William Carter, principal. Clara turned the pages toward the back with her heart in her mouth, looking for the one page a dead boy had warned her of, the oldest page, the one from the spring of 1811. And she found it. She read it once. Her hand went to her mouth. Paid to Dr. J. Sewell. The sum of $200 for attendance upon Miss E. Vance in her final illness, and for his continued discretion regarding the true nature of the same. And below it, in the same cramped hand, a second line that stopped Clara's heart clean in her chest. Materials for said attendance procured through the apothecary Gill, per the principal's particular instruction, see account. And a figure. And a date. And a word written plain, that no natural fever ever required a man to buy at an apothecary's counter. Arsenic. Clara knelt on the floor of a stranger's parlor, with the proof of a murder in her two hands, and for a moment she could not move at all. It was one thing to suspect. It was another thing entirely to hold it, to see it written down cold and clerkly, a girl's life reduced to a line item, a poison bought, and a doctor paid, and a 5-year grief manufactured on purpose by a man who then took the grieving nephew's hand and offered to carry the weight. "You monster," she whispered to the empty room. You bought the poison, and you paid the doctor, and then you comforted him. For 5 years. You sat with him, and you comforted him. A sound came from outside. Sharp. 3 short raps against the parlor window, low, and then a fourth. Nathaniel's signal. Clara's blood turned to ice water. 3 raps and a fourth Voss. Voss was coming home. Voss's luck had turned, or his money had run out, and he was walking back up Carey Street toward the very house where a farmer's daughter knelt on his landlady's floor with his murdering book open in her lap. She moved. She wrapped the ledger back in its oilcloth. No, she stopped. Thought her mind racing, cold and clear. The way it did only in the worst moments, she could not simply take the book. If Voss came home tomorrow and Friday and found the strongbox light, found the ledger gone, he'd know that instant it was stolen, and he'd warn William, and the whole thing would collapse. She'd said it herself. A theft nobody knows is a theft. She needed the truth of what was in that book, but she needed Voss to go on believing it still lay safe in the cabinet. She had no time to copy it. Voss was in the street, but she had the page. The one page that mattered most. With hands that shook now badly, she took hold of the murder page at its spine and tore it free, clean and quiet, and folded it small and thrust it down the front of her dress against her own hammering heart. Then she looked wild at the rest. The land accounts her father's ruin, Nathaniel's stolen deeds, too many pages to tear, no time, and she made a choice in half a second that would have to serve. She tore 3 more pages, the ones with the Whitmore land and the Carter deeds and William's name as principal, writ largest, folded them with the first, and hid them all against her body. Then she wrapped what was left of the ledger back in its oilcloth, set it in the strongbox, laid the false tray of papers over it, closed the lid, turned the key, and lifted the whole box back into the cabinet. Between the linens and the tea caddy, exactly as she'd found it. A man opening the box in a hurry would see the oilcloth bundle and the papers and think all was well. Only a man who sat and read every page would find the gaps where 4 sheets had been. And Voss did not read the book. Voss only guarded it. Ezra had said so. She shut the cabinet. She fitted the pins to the lock and turned it home, and the little click as it caught was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. She swept the hairpins back into her hair. She banked the fire as a lodger would, as Mrs. Cobb had bid her. And she was reaching for her carpet bag 3 steps from being clean away, when she heard a key scrape in the front lock and a man's heavy tread come into the hall. Clara Whitmore stood alone in a murderer's parlor with the proof of his crimes hidden against her heart, and Harlan Voss came home a full hour early, and there was nowhere left to run. She had 1 instant. 1. And in it, she did not freeze because a lifetime of being underestimated had taught her that the moment they expect you to freeze is the moment you smile. She snatched up her cup of long cold tea, sank into the chair by the banked fire, arranged her face into weary, harmless sorrow, and when Harlan Voss shoved open the parlor door with a scowl, a lean, gray, ordinary-looking man with a killer's flat eyes, he found not a thief, but a red-eyed young woman sniffling into a teacup by the coals. Voss stopped dead. "Who in blazes are you?" "Oh." Clara startled up, spilling the cold tea, all flustered mortification. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry I didn't." Mrs. Cobb said, "I might sit a while. I've a room to let with her, come morning, and my lodgings are so cold, and I've disturbed you. I'm so sorry. Is this your parlor?" She never said I'll go. I'll go directly. She was up gathering her bag, wiping her eyes, a picture of harmless female fluster so complete that Voss's flat, suspicious stare wavered in spite of itself. "Cobb let you sit here," he said flatly. "In the parlor, alone. She was so kind about it. I'd lost my mother, you see, and I was that lonely, and she said the fire. Oh, but I've overstayed shamefully. Look at the hour. Please forgive me, sir. I'll be gone this instant, and I'll not trouble the house again till morning." Clara bobbed a frightened little curtsy and made for the door, and she had to pass within a foot of him to reach it close enough to smell the whiskey and smoke on him, close enough that the 4 stolen pages against her heart seemed to burn like a brand, and she kept her eyes down and her step quick, and her whole body soft and harmless and beneath notice, Voss let her pass. His eyes followed her, she felt them, but he let her pass, because she was nothing, a chattering girl, a lonely nobody in a mended dress, exactly what she'd made herself, exactly what the world had always taken her for. She was at the front door, her hand was on the latch. "Girl." Clara's heart stopped. She turned slow, mild. "Sir." Harlan Voss stood in the parlor doorway, and his flat gray eyes had gone to the corner cabinet, to the walnut cabinet, with the brass lock, and Clara understood in a rush of pure animal terror that he was about to cross the room and open it, that he checked it every night he came home, that in 10 seconds he would have the strongbox out and the lid up, and even a man who didn't read the book would see the fresh torn edges if he so much as riffled the pages, and it was over. It was all over. A boy had died for nothing, and her father would never see justice, and she would never come back through the door to a man who'd begged her to. "You seen anybody about tonight?" Voss said. "Strangers. Men hanging about the street. Anybody watching the house?" Clara nearly wept with the relief of it. He wasn't thinking of the book. He was thinking of the thing his own guilty conscience feared, that someone was coming for him, that the walls were closing, that a boy's murder 2 nights gone had loosed something he couldn't call back. "Why, no, sir," she said, and let her eyes go wide and worried, and gave him, God forgive her, one last gift of her harmlessness. "No one at all. Though," she hesitated as if uncertain whether to say it, "there was a man, down the far end of the street in the dark when I came, just standing. It gave me a fright, a woman alone, but he never moved, and I hurried on past, likely nothing. A husband waiting on a wife, I told myself." She watched the alarm leap into Voss's flat eyes, watched his head turn toward the window and the dark street beyond, watched every scrap of his attention pull away from the cabinet and out toward the road where he now believed some watcher stood. Should I be frightened, sir? Is the street not safe?" "Get to your lodgings," Voss said tightly, already moving to the window, already peering out into the dark, the cabinet forgotten. "Go on. Get." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night." And Clara Whitmore opened the door and walked out into the summer dark, down the steps along Carey Street, at a lonely girl's unhurried, frightened pace, until she rounded the corner out of sight of the house, and then she ran full out. One hand pressed flat to her chest to hold 4 folded pages against her hammering heart, until a shape peeled away from a doorway ahead of her and caught her hard against him, and it was Nathaniel. It was Nathaniel with his arms around her and his heart going as wild as her own. "You're out," he breathed into her hair. "God Almighty, you're out. I saw him turn up the street and I could do nothing but knock the glass and pray, Clara. I've never been, so I thought, I have it." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and her whole face was alight with something fierce and terrible and triumphant. "Nathaniel, I have it. Not the whole book I left. The book he thinks it's safe he doesn't know, but I have the pages. The land. Your uncle's name as principal. My father's ruin in his own clerk's hand." Her voice dropped and shook, and the triumph in it cracked open into something raw. "And the other one. The one that boy died for. I have that too, against my heart right now." She pressed her hand harder to her chest. "It's real, Nathaniel. It was never a fever. He bought arsenic from an apothecary named Jill, and he paid a doctor named Sewell $200 for his silence, and it's written down in a murdering man's own account book, and I have it." Tears spilled down her face of grief and rage and horror and vindication all at once. "Your uncle murdered Eleanor. He poisoned her to break you, so he could take your fortune while you grieved, and I can prove it. I can prove every word of it. We can hang him." Nathaniel Carter stood in the dark Richmond street and held his wife against him, and Clara felt the great shudder go through his whole body as the last of the ice broke and fell away. 5 years of manufactured grief. 5 years of a stranger's engineered ruin. 5 years of thanking his own blood for the kindness of comforting, a sorrow that blood had murdered a girl to cause. He did not weep. He had gone past weeping to something quieter and far more dangerous. "Then we go home," he said very low against her hair. "We go home and we build the case airtight, and we do not move an inch until it's a noose he cannot slip. Not for the land, not for your father, though God knows he'll answer for that too." He drew back and looked down at her, and his eyes in the dark were terrible and clear. "For Eleanor, for that boy Ezra, for every soul that man has fed into his own pocket." His hand came up and cupped the side of her face, gentle where the rest of him had gone to iron. "You walked into a murderer's house tonight with 2 hairpins and a sad story, Clara Whitmore, and you walked back out with the thing that's going to hang him. There's not a soul alive I'd have trusted to do it but you." Clara leaned her face into his hand just for a moment, just long enough to feel it in the dark, with a killer's crimes folded against her heart. "Then let's go home, Mr. Carter," she whispered. "We've got a monster to hang, and a father to free, and a poor dead boy's word to keep." She stepped back and squared her shoulders and wiped her face clean of tears with the back of one steady hand. "And when it's done, when it's every bit of it done." She looked up at him and let him see for the first time the thing she'd been walling up as carefully as he'd walled up his own heart. "You can say that thing to me again. The thing from the carriage, on solid ground like you promised. And I reckon I'll be ready to believe it." They rode home through the night rather than wait for morning because neither of them could have slept in Richmond with a killer a quarter-mile off and 4 torn pages burning against Clara's heart. And on that long, dark road with the horses walking easy and the stolen truth folded safe in an oilcloth of Nathaniel's own coat, they began quietly to build the thing that would hang William Carter. 4 pages won't do it," Clara said. She'd been turning it over the whole ride, and the more she turned it, the plainer she saw the trouble. "I know that's a hard thing to hear after tonight, Nathaniel, but I'll not lie to you, and I'll not let us walk into a courtroom half-armed. 4 torn pages hidden down a woman's dress, taken from a house I entered under a false name. A good lawyer for the defense would tear them to ribbons. He'd say we forged them ourselves. He'd say a jilted farmer's daughter and a nephew hungry for his uncle's fall cooked up 4 sheets of paper between them. He'd ask why, if the crimes were real, we didn't take the whole book. He'd ask how a lady came by them, and I'd have to answer that I picked a lock and lied to a widow and robbed a boarding house. And there goes my character, and there goes the case." Nathaniel was quiet a moment, and she watched him take it, not with the old ice, but with the clear, cold reckoning of a man learning to fight the way she fought. "Then the pages aren't the weapon," he said slowly. "They're the map. They tell us where to dig. But the case has to be built out of things a court can't wave off: living witnesses, real documents, men who'll swear to it under oath." "Now you're thinking like a thief catcher instead of a thief's victim." Clara nodded in the dark. "The pages give us 3 roads. The apothecary Gill who sold the arsenic, the Dr. Sewell who took the $200 for his silence, and the land your deeds, my father's deeds, sold to a company we can now prove your uncle owns." She counted them on her fingers, though he couldn't see. "If even one of those 3 men can be made to talk, if Jill will swear he sold poison to Voss on William's order, or if Sewell will confess what he was paid to hide, then the pages stop being the whole case and start being the thing that confirms an honest man's testimony. That's how you hang him, Nathaniel. Not with paper and a living voice, each one propping up the other, so neither can be knocked down alone." "Sewell," Nathaniel said. "The doctor. He's the one who'd know the whole of it. If Eleanor was poisoned, he tended her, he saw it. He signed the paper that called it fever. He's carried that for 5 years." His jaw tightened. "A man carries a thing like that 5 years, Clara, it eats him. You said it yourself of that boy. Some men can't be bought quiet forever. The guilt starts to cost more than the money paid. Then Sewell's our first road." Clara hesitated. "But carefully, Nathaniel. Whatever eats at that doctor, he's still the man who took the money and signed the lie. He's not the frightened, honest boy Ezra was. He's a grown man who chose his silence with his eyes open 5 years running. We can't walk in and take his hands and call him good. We have to make him more afraid of us than he is of your uncle. We have to make him understand that the walls are already down, that the book's as good as ours. That his only road left is to turn state's witness before your uncle does to him what he did to that boy on the stairs." Nathaniel turned to look at her in the dark. You think William would kill the doctor too? I think William Carter has killed a woman and a boy that we know of, Clara said quietly. And a man who's killed twice has stopped counting. The moment your uncle suspects Sewell might talk, Sewell dies of a fall down a stair, same as Ezra. Which means Nathaniel. Her voice dropped, and the urgency in it filled the dark carriage. We have to reach that doctor before your uncle learns we're anywhere near him. Everything we do now, we do quiet, and we do fast, because the man we're hunting is hunting too, and he's been better at it than us for 5 long years. Chapter Egg. They came home to Carter Manor near dawn, and Mrs. Abbott met them at the door, white-faced with a fresh trouble, because trouble no longer knocked at that house, it moved in and set up housekeeping. He's been again, she said before they'd cleared the steps. Your uncle. Yesterday and the day before. Twice. Asking after you both. Where you'd gone when you'd be back, what business took you off so sudden? Her old hands twisted her apron. I told him you'd gone to see Mrs. Carter's ailing father in Lynchburg, like you told me to say. But he didn't like it, Master Carter. He stood in that hall, and he looked at me long, and he said— She swallowed. He said, Richmond's a fair piece past Lynchburg Abbott. See, the boy remembers which town his wife's father lies in. She looked between them. He knows you were in Richmond, sir. Same as before. I don't know how, but he knows. Clara and Nathaniel traded a look. He's got men watching us, Clara said. Or the roads, or both. He's had 5 years and a stolen fortune to buy eyes all over this country, Nathaniel. She turned to Mrs. Abbott. What did he want past frightening you? A man like that doesn't ride out twice to ask after our travels. What did he really come for? The old woman's face crumpled. Money, she whispered. He came to sell the last of the good horses. Said the estate owed on notes come due, and there was nothing for it but to sell the stock. He had papers. Master Carter and men with a lead line, and I stood in the door, and I told him you'd left strict word. Nothing was to leave this land while you were gone, and he— Her voice broke. He struck me, sir. Backhand across the face. First time in 20 years any Carter raised a hand to me, and the warm went out of him again, that same cold I told you of, and he said, You'll learn who runs this family before we're through, old woman. And he took the horses anyway. 4 of them. The bays your father raised. Nathaniel went very still. Clara saw his hand close slowly into a fist, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, and she stepped close and laid her hand over that fist before the rage in him could find a door. He struck you, Nathaniel said, low and terrible. He rode onto my land, and he struck a woman who's kept my house for 20 years. Nathaniel! Clara pressed his fist. I know. And he'll answer for it, for that and all the rest, every bit of it, I swear to you. But not now. Not by riding after him in a fury, which is exactly what he wants. She turned his face toward her with her free hand. Don't you see what he's doing? He's poking you. He struck her to poke you. He wants you angry, wants you to come charging after him like your father would have, like my father did. Straight on with the truth in your fist, because a man in a rage makes mistakes, and a man who makes mistakes is easy to ruin. He's baiting the hook, Nathaniel. Don't take it. The angrier he makes you, the calmer we've got to be. But, Nathaniel breathed. She watched him fight it down, watched him choose her cold, clear way over his own hot one, and it was the hardest thing she'd yet seen him do. And when he'd done it, something settled in him that had not been there before. A patience. A killer's patience of his own. Mrs. Abbott, he said, and his voice had gone quiet and even. I'm sorry past words that he laid a hand on you. That's a debt I mean to see paid in full and soon. But I need you to be brave a while longer, and I need you to keep saying exactly what you've said, Lynchburg, her ailing father, nothing more. Can you do that? I can, sir. The old woman drew herself up. For 20 years I've kept this family's secrets. I can keep a few more days' worth, and gladly to see that man hang. Then keep them, Nathaniel said, because we're going to hang him, Mrs. Abbott. My wife's seen to that. All that's left is the how and the when, and neither of those belongs to William Carter anymore. They belong to us. Dr. Josiah Sewell kept a narrow practice in a town a half-day's ride south, and Clara and Nathaniel found him on the second afternoon in the small back room, where he mixed his tinctures, a stooped man, near 60 gray and gray-faced, with a tremor in his hands that Clara marked at once and understood. "That shake in your hands, doctor," she said, before Nathaniel could speak, before there'd been so much as an introduction. "How long have you had it?" The old doctor looked up startled at the young woman who'd walked into his back room and asked such a thing. "I beg your pardon. Who are you? The surgeries?" "About 5 years, I'd guess," Clara went on, gentle, relentless. "It came on you sometime in the spring of 1811, I'd wager, and it's never quite left. And there are mornings you can't hold a spoon steady, and you tell yourself it's age, but you know it isn't age, doctor, don't you? You know exactly what it is and exactly when it started." Sewell had gone white. His gray shaking hands set down the pestle he'd been holding very carefully, as if afraid of dropping it. "Who are you?" he whispered again, but there was no demand left in it now, only dread. "My name is Clara Carter," she said. "And this is my husband, Nathaniel Carter. And I believe, doctor, you knew a young woman named Eleanor Vance in the spring of 1811. I believe you attended her final illness, and I believe you have not held a spoon steady since the day you signed the paper that called her death a fever." She stepped closer, and her voice stayed soft, soft, as the voice she'd used on the boy Ezra, but there was iron running all the way through it now. "I believe you've carried her for 5 years, doctor. I believe she visits you. And I truly believe that some part of you has been waiting all this time for someone to walk through that door and finally make you say it out loud." The old doctor's mouth worked. No sound came out. His eyes went from Clara's face to Nathaniel, who stood silent and terrible in the doorway, the very image of a grief the doctor had helped to manufacture, and something in Josiah Sewell that had been holding for 5 long years simply let go. "You're him," he said hoarsely, staring at Nathaniel. "You're the nephew. The one who—" His voice cracked. "God help me. God forgive me. I've prayed you'd come. I've prayed you'd never come. Both at once, every day for 5 years. He sank down onto a stool as if his legs had quit him. "How much do you know?" "We know she was poisoned," Nathaniel said. It was the first time he'd spoken, and his voice came out low and steady and awful. "We know it was arsenic. We know it was bought from an apothecary named Gill on William Carter's instruction. And we know you were paid $200 to call it a fever and hold your tongue." Boy. He took one step into the room. "What we don't know, doctor, is whether you'll die a man who murdered a girl for money, or a man who found his courage 5 years too late, but found it at last. That's the only thing left for you to decide, and you're going to decide it today." Sewell put his face in his shaking hands. "I didn't poison her." The words came muffled, wretched. "You have to believe that much at least. I never gave her a thing. But He looked up and his gray face was wet. "I saw it. I saw what it was. A doctor of 20 years' practice. You think I didn't know arsenic when I saw it kill, the vomiting, the burning, the way she—" He stopped, shuddering. "Her family thought fever. Her poor mother sat by that bed and thought her girl was dying of a summer fever. And I stood there and I knew, and I said nothing. Because 2 days before William Carter had come to me in the night and put $200 on my table and told me that a wise physician sometimes finds it prudent to call a thing by a gentler name than the truth. And when I understood what he was asking, when I understood what was already being done to that girl in that house, I was afraid. God help me. I was a coward, and I was afraid, and I took the money, and I signed the paper, and I have not held a spoon steady since." He wept openly now, an old man's terrible weeping. "I've wanted to die every day for 5 years. I've wanted someone to come and drag it out of me. I couldn't say it myself. I hadn't the courage even for that. But if you've come to make me say it, then thank God. Thank God. I'll say it. I'll say all of it to anyone, to a court, to the whole world. And I'll hang beside him if I must. And it'll be a mercy, because at least then it'll finally be out of me." Clara knelt down in front of the broken old man and took his shaking hands in both of hers, the same gesture she'd given the boy. But there was no gentleness of forgiveness in it now, only the firm grip of one soul holding another upright long enough to do a hard thing. "You'll not hang, Doctor," she said quietly. "A man who confesses and turns witness doesn't hang. But you'll do the hard thing. You'll swear it all out in writing before a magistrate today, if we can manage it, everything William Carter said to you, the money, the paper, what you saw in that room. And you'll name the apothecary Gill, so we can bring him in too before William learns any of us have been to see you." Her grip tightened. "Because here's the truth you have to hold on to, Doctor Sewell, and it's a hard one. The moment William Carter suspects you might talk, you're a dead man. He killed Eleanor. He killed a clerk named Ezra Pauling in Richmond 3 nights ago and called it a fall down a stair. You are the single most dangerous witness alive to him, and you have been for 5 years, and the only reason you've lived this long is that he believed his money had you bought forever. The day he doubts that is the day you die." She held his eyes. "So we do this fast. We do this today. We get your confession, sworn and copied, and into safe hands, where killing you can't unmake it. Do you understand me? Your life now depends on how quickly you find your courage, so find it fast." The old doctor looked into her fierce, steady eyes, and he gripped her hands back, and for the first time in 5 years, Josiah Sewell nodded like a man instead of flinching like a whipped dog. "Today," he said. "Yes, today, before I lose my nerve. Get me a magistrate and a Bible and I'll swear it till my hand falls off." He drew a ragged breath. "And Jill the apothecary, you'll want to move on him tonight before word travels. Gill's a weak, greedy little man. He sold the poison knowing full well, and he's lived fat on Carter money ever since, and he'll fold the moment he sees the walls are down, but he'll also run to William the moment he smells danger. So you take him quiet, and you take him quick." He wiped his face. "I can tell you where his shop is. I can tell you the poison was entered in his own poison register. The law requires it. Every apothecary keeps one. There'll be an entry, a sale of arsenic dated, signed for by Voss, but bought for Carter. It's the law. He couldn't have left it out without breaking the very statute that'd hang him. It's there in Gill's own book in his own hand. You've only to make him show it before he thinks to burn the page." Clara looked up at Nathaniel, and a fierce, bright understanding passed between them. A second book. A second register kept by law with the poison sale written in it plain. Not 4 torn pages hidden in a lady's dress that a lawyer could call a forgery, but a lawful poison register kept under statute that any magistrate would know at a glance no one had forged. "That's it," Clara breathed. "That's the thing that can't be waved off, Nathaniel. That's the living second voice to prop up the paper. The doctor's sworn confession, and the apothecary's lawful register, and our 4 pages from Voss's book, underneath them, both 3 separate hands, 3 separate crimes, all pointing at one man." She rose to her feet. "A lawyer can call one of them a lie. He can't call all 3 a lie without calling the law itself a liar." She turned to Sewell. "Doctor the magistrate, the nearest honest one, not one your Williams bought. Do you know such a man?" "Judge Alden," Sewell said, 2 towns east. An honest man and no friend to the Carters. William cheated his brother in a land deal years back, and Alden's never forgotten it. He'll not be bought, and he'll not be frightened, and he'll move fast if the case is sound." The old doctor got to his feet, and though his hands still shook, something in his stooped back had straightened. "Take me to Alden. I'll swear it out. And then, by God, take that apothecary before nightfall, and let's finish this thing that should have been finished 5 years ago." Yakumar. It moved fast after that, faster than Clara had dared hope, and faster than William Carter for all his eyes on the roads could track. They took Josiah Sewell to Judge Alden that same afternoon, and the old doctor swore out his confession before the magistrate in a firm, ruined voice. Every word of it, the money and the poison and the 5 years of silence. And Alden, A lean, hard old man with no love for the Carter name, listened to the whole of it, with a face gone grimmer by the minute, and when it was done, he had it copied out twice by his own clerk and sealed. One copy locked in his own strongbox, and one dispatched by trusted rider to the county seat, so that no killing of doctor or judge could now unmake what had been sworn. "That's the doctor's safe," Alden said when it was done. "A confession sworn and copied and lodged 2 places can't be undone by a knife in the dark. Sewell, you'll stay under my roof tonight and every night till the trial. I've men enough to keep you breathing." He turned his hard eyes on Nathaniel and Clara. "Now, the apothecary. If what the doctor says is true, if there's a lawful poison register with that sale entered, then that's the linchpin of the whole business, and your uncle's finished. But a register can be burned, and a greedy apothecary can be frightened into running or into your uncle's arms. So you'll want the law with you when you take him, and you'll want it tonight before this doctor's absence from his own surgery starts folk talking." He rose. "I'll send my constable and a warrant. You'll have the law at your back, Mr. Carter. See it's done clean." They rode on Gill's shop that same night, Nathaniel and Clara and the judge's constable, with a lawful warrant in his coat, and it went almost exactly as the doctor had foretold. Gill was a soft, round, frightened little man, and the sight of a constable and a warrant in his doorway near stopped his heart. He blustered. He denied. He said he kept no such register. And then, when the constable read him the statute and the penalty for an apothecary who failed to keep one, he changed his tune and said, perhaps he did keep one, but it was lost. And then when Nathaniel took one slow step toward him, it all came apart at once. "He made me," Gill squealed, backing into his own shelves so the bottles rang. "William Carter, it was him. Not me. I only sold what I was licensed to sell. How was I to know what he meant to do with it? He came with Voss, and he paid triple, and he said no questions, and a man's got to eat. I've a family." He was scrabbling now, digging under his own counter, and he came up with a book, a plain ledger, the poison register the law required, and he thrust it at the constable, as if it were on fire. There you see, I kept it lawful. I entered it, same as the statute. Says arsenic 3 ounces sold to H. Voss, on account of Wum Carter dated the 9th of May, 1811. I did everything by the law, I did. It's not my crime, I only sold it. You only sold the poison that killed a girl, Nathaniel said quietly, and lived fat on the killer's gratitude for 5 years. Save your speeches for the court, Mr. Gill. You'll have need of them. Clara took the register from the constable's hands with a kind of reverence, and turned to the entry and read it and closed her eyes. There it was, dated, signed, lawful. The 9th of May, 1811. 2 days before Eleanor Vance began to die of what a bought doctor called a fever. 3 ounces of arsenic sold to Voss on the account of William Carter. Written in an apothecary's own hand in the very register, the law compelled him to keep, and never once thought to destroy, because for 5 years he'd believed himself untouchable. "We have him," she said very low to Nathaniel, as the constable clapped irons on the blubbering apothecary. The doctor's sworn confession, the poison register in a lawful hand, Voss's own 4 pages naming your uncle principal. 3 hands Nathaniel. 3 separate men, 3 separate crimes, and every road runs to the same door. She opened her eyes and they were wet and blazing at once. "It's done! He can't slip it. There's no lie big enough to swallow all 3. William Carter is going to hang for what he did to Eleanor, and to my father, and to that boy on the stairs. And there's not a thing on this earth he can do to stop it now." But even as she said it, even as the words left her mouth, the constable's face changed, and he turned toward the shop door, and Clara heard it too. Horses. Many horses hard-ridden coming up the dark street fast, and men's voices, and the particular sound a group of armed men makes when they mean business, and her blood ran cold, because a man who had eyes on every road might well have eyes on an apothecary too. "That's not the judge's men," the constable said grimly, drawing his pistol. "The judge's men are back at Alden's guarding the doctor, whoever that is." The shop door slammed open, and William Carter walked in out of the dark with 4 hard men at his back, and the warm was clean gone from his face, all of it forever, and what stood in its place was the true man underneath 20 years of smiling cold and gray and murderous. A man who had killed a girl and a boy and would kill again without a flicker, and who had finally run out of patience with the nephew he'd bled for 5 long years. "Well?" William Carter said, in a voice like a grave being dug. His flat eyes went from the constable's pistol to the apothecary in irons, to the register in Clara's hands, and Clara watched him understand in one cold instant exactly how much they had, and exactly how finished he was, and exactly how little he had left to lose. "It seems," he said softly, "my nephew has been busy, and his little farm-bred wife busier still." His eyes settled on Clara on the register clutched to her chest, and something in them made her blood stop. "You've cost me a great deal, girl, more than you know. But you've made one poor bargain tonight, coming to a lonely shop on a dark road with only one constable and no earthly notion that I've had a man watching this apothecary for 5 years against exactly this night." He smiled, then, not the warm smile, the other one, the true one, and it was the most frightening thing Clara had ever seen on a human face. "You should have stayed a nobody, Mrs. Carter. Nobodies live longer." And Nathaniel Carter stepped in front of his wife between Clara and the 4 armed men, and the murdering uncle he'd once thanked for his kindness, and his voice when it came was quiet and steady and held no fear at all. "You'll not touch her, uncle," he said. "You'll not touch any of us, because you've made the one mistake tonight that even you can't buy your way clear of." He didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He only stood there tall and terrible and calm, shielding Clara with his own body. "The doctor's confession is sworn and sealed and copied to the county seat an hour's hard ride from here in Judge Alden's own hand. Kill every soul in this room, and it changes nothing. It's already out of your reach, already beyond your knife, already lodged where no fall down a stair can touch it. It's done, William. It was done before you rode up. You've come all this way to murder us over a thing that's already past saving." Nathaniel's eyes held his uncle's unblinking. "The only question left is whether you hang for one girl or for a shop full of witnesses too. And I don't believe," he said it soft and sure, "I don't believe even you are far enough gone to swing for nothing. Are you, uncle?" Now that the money's already lost, the shop went dead silent. Clara's heart hammered against the poison register clutched to her chest. The 4 hard men looked to William. The constable's pistol did not waver. And William Carter stood in the doorway of a poison seller's shop with his whole 5-year murder finally unraveling around him, and Clara watched the terrible cold calculation move behind his flat gray eyes, watched him weigh the killing of them all against a confession already fled beyond his reach, watched him understand at last that there was no profit left in murder because the fortune was already gone and the noose already woven. And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune and found a war, who had picked a lock and lied to a widow and knelt before a broken doctor, and stood now behind the shielding body of a man who 11 days past had told her never to speak. Clara stepped out from behind her husband to stand at his side, instead of in his shadow, and looked William Carter dead in his murdering eyes. "You were right about one thing, Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice did not shake at all. "I should have stayed a nobody. Nobodies do live longer." She lifted the register so the lamplight caught it. "But I stopped being a nobody the day your family took my father's land, and the day your poison took that girl, and the day your hands broke a good boy's neck on a Richmond stair. You made me a somebody, William Carter. You and your kind. You spent 30 years making somebodies out of every nobody you ever robbed, and you never once stopped to wonder what would happen the day one of us learned to count." She took a breath. "It's over. Not because we're strong and you're weak. You've got 4 armed men and we've got 1 constable, and we both know how that math runs. It's over because the truth is already gone past where you can reach it. You can kill us all and it won't buy you back a single hour. So put up your men and take what's coming to you, like the last shred of a man you might still be, or gun down a shop full of witnesses and hang twice over. Either way, you lose. For the first time in your whole long thieving life, William Carter, there is no bargain left for you to make." For a long, terrible moment, nobody in that shop moved, and the whole thing hung on the edge of a knife. One constable, one pistol, 4 hard men, and a murderer weighing his last bad options. And it was one of William's own men who broke it. The nearest of them, a raw-boned fellow with a scar through his lip, looked from the register in Clara's hands to the irons on the apothecary, to the calm, shielding shape of Nathaniel Carter. And Clara watched him do the same sum she'd laid out loud. Confession already fled, fortune already gone a-hanging, waiting whether he fired or not. And she watched him decide he'd not swing for a man who'd just been told plainly there was no money left to pay him with. "I never signed on for murder," the man said low, and took a step back toward the door. "Land dealings. Mr. Carter, rough work, I'll grant you that. But not a shop full of witnesses with a constable standing in it. Not for a man whose accounts just went to the county seat." He looked at the other 3. "Nor should you. There's no wage coming from a dead man's purse." And that was all it took. The moment one of them said aloud what all 4 were thinking, the thing William Carter had held together for 30 years by money and fear came apart in his hands, because money and fear were the only things that had ever held it, and both had run dry in a single night. One by one, the hard men stepped back, and the pistols that might have been drawn stayed in their belts, and William Carter stood alone in the doorway, with no army left at his back, just a lean gray murderer whose whole long reign had rested, it turned out, on nothing but other men's belief that crossing him cost more than it paid. The constable moved then quick and had his pistol leveled square at William's chest. "William Carter," he said, "by warrant of Judge Alden, you're under arrest for the willful murder of Eleanor Vance. And we'll be adding the boy in Richmond, and God knows what else before the week's out. Put out your hands." William did not put out his hands. He stood there, and his flat gray eyes went slowly around the room to the apothecary, blubbering in his irons, to the register in Clara's grip, to the men who'd abandoned him, and last of all to Nathaniel, to the nephew he'd bled for 5 years. And something moved in that cold face that Clara had not expected. Not fear, not remorse. Something worse, a kind of bafflement, the honest confusion of a man who could not even now, even at the end, understand what he'd done wrong. "I gave you a fortune," William said to Nathaniel, and his voice had gone strange, almost plaintive. "Do you understand that, boy? Your father would have run this estate into the ground inside a decade soft sentimental, always paying his hands too much and his debts too slow. I made this family what it was. I made hard choices your father hadn't the stomach for. And you," his lip curled, "you'd hand it all back over a farm girl and a dead woman 5 years cold. You always were your father's son, weak, grateful for scraps." "Bush." Eleanor, Nathaniel said quietly, was not a scrap. Eleanor was a problem. William's voice cracked out of him now, and for the first time the true rot showed all the way down. "She'd have made you soft, the same way your mother made your father soft. She'd have filled that house with children and charity, and kayed the purse to every beggar in the county. I saw what she was doing to you. You were already going soft with love for her, already talking of freeing hands and forgiving debts, and I had 30 years and a fortune in this family, and I was not about to watch a sweet-faced girl undo it all in a season." He said it plainly, terribly, as though it were reason itself. "So I made a hard choice, the way I always made the hard choices. And you grieved, and I ran the estate the way it should be run, and it would have gone on fine. It would have gone on fine forever, if you hadn't gone and married another one just like her." And there it was, the whole black heart of it confessed aloud in a poison seller's shop before a constable and 4 witnesses, not wrung out by any clever trap, but simply spilled because a man that far gone could not in the end resist explaining why his monstrousness had been sense all along. Clara heard the constable draw a sharp breath. She heard the apothecary go silent. She heard beside her the terrible stillness of a man learning the exact shape of the thing that had murdered the woman he loved and stolen 5 years of his life. "You killed her," Nathaniel said, "because she was making me kind." "I killed her," William said, "because kind men lose fortunes. And now you'll lose yours, boy, and prove me right in the losing." He smiled his true smile one last time. "Enjoy your farm girl, Enjoy your honest poverty. When you're ruined and soft and your hands have all wandered off to better wages, you remember your Uncle William, who understood the world as it is, and not as weak men wish it were. I'll remember you, Nathaniel said. I'll remember you swinging from a rope, Uncle. And then I'll go home and free every hand you ever frightened and forgive every debt you ever forged, and I'll fill that house with exactly the children and charity you murdered a woman to prevent. And it'll thrive, William. That's the part you never understood in 30 years and never will. Kindness didn't ruin this family. You did. And a kind house is going to outlast your grave by 100 years. He turned his back on his uncle, then the deepest insult one man can offer another, to simply turn away, and he looked instead at the constable. Take him. I don't care to look at him anymore. They took William Carter out into the dark in irons, and he did not struggle, and he did not speak again. And the last Clara saw of his face, it wore the look of a man who had finally at the very end begun to suspect that he might have been wrong about everything, and could not bear the thought, and so turned his eyes away from it and went to his cell, still clutching the only thing he'd ever had, which was the certainty that everyone softer than himself was a fool. The trial came that autumn, and it was the largest thing that county had seen in a generation. Folk rode in from 3 counties over to pack the courthouse and the yard around it, because word had spread of what the rich, cold Carter had married, and of the farm girl who'd brought down the man who ruined half the valley. The case was exactly as airtight as Clara had built it to be. Dr. Sewell took the stand and swore out the whole of it in a firm, ruined voice. The money and the poison and the 5 years of silence, and wept once and did not look away. Gill the apothecary in irons produced his lawful poison register, with the sale entered in his own hand, dated 2 days before Eleanor Vance began to die, and no lawyer alive could call a statutory register a forgery. And when the 4 torn pages from Voss's own account book were laid beside the confession and the register, William Carter named principal, the land accounts my father's ruin and Nathaniel's stolen deeds, all in one thieving hand. The thing stood complete, 3 separate men and 3 separate crimes, and every road running to a single door, exactly as Clara had promised on a dark carriage road a lifetime ago. Voss turned state's witness to save his own neck and gave up the rest. The Richmond clerk on the stairs, the whole machinery of the Piedmont Land and Improvement, concerned 30 years of forged debts and ruined families. And William Carter sat through all of it with a face like gray stone and offered no defense that meant anything, because there was none to offer, and when the jury came back, it took them less than an hour. They hanged William Carter on a cold, bright morning, and Clara did not go to watch, and neither did Nathaniel. I told him I'd remember him swinging, Nathaniel said, and I will, but I don't need to see it to remember it. I've got better things to fill my eyes with now. And they stayed home that morning, the 2 of them, and when the church bell tolled the hour, they knew it was done, and they stood together in the hall of the house that no longer felt like a grave, and neither of them spoke for a long while, and then Clara said, "It's over." And Nathaniel said, "No, it's finished. There's a difference. Over is a thing that stops. Finished is a thing that's been made whole." And Clara thought about that, and found it was true. Her father came home that same autumn. They brought him from the rented room in Lynchburg, and the stolen Whitmore land was restored by the court's order, every acre and more, besides in damages wrung out of William Carter's forfeited estate. But it was not the land that undid Clara when the wagon came up the long oak lane. It was her father's face at the window of it, thin and gray and old before his time, the hollowed-out look she'd watched the ruin carve into him for 2 years, and the way that face changed when he saw her running down the lane toward him, the way something came back into it that she'd thought was gone for good. "Papa," she said, and had his hands in hers before the wagon fully stopped, the same hands she'd watched go small and afraid in the bad years. "Papa, it's yours again, all of it. The land, the name, everything they took. I got it back. I got it all back." Her father looked at her, and then past her at the great pale house, and then at the tall grave man coming down the steps behind her, and his eyes filled. "You got it back," he repeated, wondering. "Clara, girl, I lost it. I lost everything your grandfather built, and everything I promised your mother, and I sat in that room 2 years, thinking I'd failed you past any mending, and you—" His voice broke. You got it back. How? How does a girl I couldn't even give a proper dowry to bring down a man that beat men twice her strength? By counting, Papa, Clara said, and laughed and cried both at once. You taught me to count. You sat me down when I was 11, and you taught me to keep a ledger, and you thought you were teaching me to run a farm, but what you were really teaching me, she pressed his hands, was how to catch a thief. Everything I did with the thing you put in my hands 20 years ago. So you didn't fail me, Papa. You armed me. You just didn't know it yet. And her father wept and held her, and over her shoulder, his wet eyes found Nathaniel's, and the two men looked at each other a long moment. The farmer who'd lost everything, and the rich man who'd once bought his daughter like a bolt of cloth. And something passed between them that did not need words. And Nathaniel came down the last of the steps and put out his hand, and Clara's father took it. I owe you an apology, sir, Nathaniel said, for the manner in which I first took your daughter into my house. I did it coldly, and I did it low, and I'm ashamed of every word I said to her that day. I can't unmake it. But I can tell you that she is the finest person I have ever known, and that she saved my life, and my name, and my whole estate, and that if you'll permit it, I mean to spend whatever years I've got trying to deserve her. He paused. And I'll tell you one thing more. She got your land back through the courts, but the debt I owe her no court could ever set a figure to. So your land came home free and clear. Mr. Whitmore, and it stays that way, and there's 100 acres more beside it in the deed, if you'll have it, and that's not charity, and it's not payment. It's a son trying badly to thank the man who raised the woman who saved him. Clara's father looked at the deed, and then at his daughter, and then at the man holding out his rough hand, and he did not take the 100 acres. Not that day, because pride dies hard in a farmer, and rightly so. But he took the hand, and he held it. And that was enough. And it was a beginning. Tag. They were married again in the spring. Not the cold arrangement beneath a wooden arch with a town come to gawk that had been a contract, a purchase, a bargain struck between a desperate father and a frozen man. This time they married because they chose to in a small church with the doors thrown open to the May air, with Delia and Amos and Mrs. Abbott in the front pews, weeping openly with Clara's father, giving her away on an arm gone strong again, with honest work with old Josiah Sewell in the back, who'd asked, trembling, if he might come, and Nathaniel had said, "You told the truth when it cost you everything. You've earned a seat at any joy of mine." But the marrying was not the thing Clara remembered longest. What she remembered was the night before on the porch of the house that had finally fully come back to life. The house that rang now with the voices of restored hands and their children, that had music in it again, and 40 at the supper table, and lamps burning in every window because a warm house wastes light and doesn't count the cost. You never said it again, Clara said into the dark. You told me in the carriage that day coming back from Richmond, the thing about furniture, about my ending the silence. And I told you not then that you weren't in your right mind, that I'd not be a raft for a drowning man. And you said you'd say it again. On solid ground, when it was all finished. She turned to look at him. It's finished, Nathaniel. The ground's as solid as it'll ever get. And you never said it again. Nathaniel was quiet a moment. I've been afraid to, he admitted. Which is a strange thing for a man to confess who watched his uncle hang. But there it is. I told you once I bought you to be furniture to fill a silence I couldn't bear. And I meant to say the true thing when it was over. But the nearer we got to over, the more I feared you'd only stayed for the fight. That you'd been fighting for your father, and that boy, and Eleanor, and Delia, and Amos, and all the frightened souls in this house for everyone but me. You said as much yourself that first night. I'm not fighting for you, Mr. Carter. And I was afraid that when the fighting stopped, you'd look at me and see only the cold man in the carriage and go home to your father's land, and I'd have no war left to keep you. He looked at her. So I didn't say it. Because a thing unsaid can't be refused. Clara was quiet a long moment. You fool, she said softly. You dear, cold, brilliant fool of a man. She took his hand. I told you that night I wasn't fighting for you because I didn't know you well enough yet, and that was true that first night. But that was 11 days into knowing you, Nathaniel, and it's been near a year now, and I've knelt beside you over a murdered woman's account book, and I've watched you weep for a clerk you knew one day, and I've seen you shield me with your own body from 4 armed men, and I've watched you offer my broken father your hand and 100 acres and call it a debt you owed. She turned his hand over in both of hers. You want to know when I stopped fighting only for everyone else and started fighting for you, too. It was the honeysuckle. That first day, I put a jar of it by your supper because I felt sorry for a house so silent, and you shoved it to the corner of the desk where you wouldn't have to look at it, and then when you thought no one saw, you pulled it back into the light. I saw you do it. Through the study door before I went up. A man who tries that hard to stay frozen and can't quite manage it over a jar of wildflowers. Her voice caught. That's a man worth thawing, Nathaniel Carter. I decided it that very first night. I just wasn't fool enough to tell you before you'd earned it. Nathaniel looked at her in the dark, and Clara watched the last of the fear go out of him. The fear that had outlived the grief, that had outlived even the ice. The deepest and most stubborn of all his frozen places. The one that whispered a man like him could only ever be tolerated, never chosen. Clara Whitmore, he said, and his voice was not cold, and it was not stone, and it had not one shred of the man from the carriage left in it. I bought you to fill a silence, and instead you ended it. I told you never to speak, and it turned out your voice was the only thing that ever saved me. I said love was ownership, and I was wrong, and love was betrayal, and I was wrong, and love only ever brought pain, and I was wrong about that too, most of all, about that. I know now what love is. It's a farm girl with 2 hairpins and a ledger and more courage than any man I ever met who walked into my dead house and refused day after day to let me stay dead in it. He drew her hands to his chest over the heart she'd cracked open and thawed and finally fully brought back to life. I love you, not because you saved my land or my name or my life, though you did all 3. I love you because you looked at the coldest, lowest, most ruined man in Virginia, and you decided he was worth thawing, and then you did it not with sweetness, not with scraps, but with the truth every day, whether I wanted to hear it or not. There's the thing I promised to say again on solid ground. I love you, Clara. I have loved you since the honeysuckle. I'll love you till they put me in the ground, and I hope to God that's 50 years from now, with a house full of the children and the charity my uncle murdered a woman to prevent. And Clara Whitmore, who had married a fortune and buried her fear and cracked a frozen heart and hanged a monster and brought her father home and gotten back every acre. The cruel had stolen, looked at the man who had once told her never to speak unless spoken to, and she found she had at long last nothing clever left to say. Only the truest thing, the plainest thing, the thing underneath all the rest. I love you too, you cold-thawed fool, she said. Now kiss me like you mean it this time. You skipped it at the first wedding, and I've been waiting near a year to be cross with you about it. And he did. And it was nothing at all like a contract, and nothing at all like a bargain, and nothing at all like the cold nod he'd given her beneath a wooden arch a lifetime ago, while a cruel town whispered that he'd bought her. Years later, the people of that valley would tell the story of Nathaniel and Clara Carter, not as the tale of a rich man who purchased a poor bride to save his name, though that was how it began, but as the tale of the farm girl who counted, who walked into a dying house full of frightened people, and a frozen man, and a 5-year lie, and who, armed with nothing but a ledger and her father's teaching, and a courage that would not quit, brought a murderer to the rope, brought a broken doctor to the truth, brought a ruined old farmer home to his land, and brought the coldest heart in Virginia back to life, one honest word at a time. They would tell how the great pale house that had been a grave became the warmest home in 3 counties, its windows always lit its table, always full, its hands always paid fair and freed of debt, its doors thrown open to every soul that William Carter's kind had ever ground down. And they would tell how the master of it, a man once made of stone, was known in his later years as the kindest gentleman in the valley, and how whenever a stranger marveled that such a warm man could ever have been called cold, he would only smile and glance at the gray-haired woman beside him and say that he'd been frozen solid once dead and buried in his own house until a farmer's daughter he'd wronged looked past every cruel thing he'd done and decided against all sense that he was worth the thawing. Because in the end, that was the whole of it, and the truest thing either of them ever knew, that the person the world swore would ruin your life can turn out to be the very one who teaches you at last how to live it, and that a heart frozen a lifetime can still be brought back whole. If only someone is brave enough and stubborn enough and kind enough to refuse to let it stay dead. And Clara Carter was all three. She always had been. The world had simply never bothered to look.